Welcome to the bonfire, unkindled one. I am a firekeeper. I tend to the flame, and tend to thee. The lords have left their thrones, and must be delivered to them. To this end, I am at thy side. Ashen One, produce the coiled sword at the bonfire. The mark of ash will guide thee to the land of the lords, to Lothric, where the homes of the lords converge.
Let your true strength shine. Be safe, our Lord.
Ashen One, this is much like what lies within me. Then let it find its own place within my bosom. Ashen One, I am truly sorry. Very well. She will understand. We are both firekeepers after all. Forgive me, sister. May the flames guide thy way.
Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Dark Souls 3 Let's Talk Lore. This is episode number 16, being recorded on Monday the 11th of September. I hope you're all having a fantastic day whenever it is you find yourself watching this. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm back from my research trip. My research itself isn't done yet, but I'm back at home, and I had originally anticipated that this episode wouldn't be out until October, but I missed doing this a little bit more than I expected I would. So this episode I actually started working on a little bit when I had some downtime during my research, and I've been working on this on and off since I got home. So let's talk a little bit about what this episode actually is first. And I should also note that if you're here looking for JSF, I should draw a distinction between when it says with and then the guest name in the title of the video versus when it says featuring that guest. So in episode 10 with JSF and Cassative, that meant that they were with me for the entire episode. Whereas when it says featuring, which is something I've been wanting to do since the start of this series, when it says featuring, it means that a guest has joined me for a certain discussion within the context of the episode, a discussion that was spliced in after the fact, and not during the recording of the episode itself. And by contrast to my usual process of recording, usually I record the gameplay part of the episode first. That's usually the first thing I record, but in the context of this episode, I'm actually recording the gameplay last. But yeah, I can explain much better with the help of the comment which gave me the idea for this episode. So, Vodka Foley writes, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, in part because during my research trip, when I complained on Twitter about not having a creative outlet while being away from home, Vodka Foley kindly drew and shared with me this wonderful portrait of Aegon of Astora. So I thank you kindly for that. With Dark Souls 3 Let's Talk lore most likely ending up as an incredibly long series, perhaps it'd be worth having an interlude of sorts as a midpoint, kind of like previously on Dragon Let's Talk lore. It might not end up as a full feature-length piece, but having multiple parts could save you time on editing and your computer wouldn't be tied up for so long rendering footage of a hour-plus long video and give you a bit of breathing room without feeling overly pressured about pumping out updates as often. So it was this comment which spawned the idea for this episode, and that is in spite of what the latter half of this comment says as, you know, a very kind way of saying, here's a way you can not stress yourself out or not spend too much time on this episode, but still have an episode that is, you know, valuable and worthwhile, especially for those who, you know, maybe haven't seen the first half of the series and they like to jump in, or if, you know, if you haven't seen the earlier episodes since they were first released, because this series has now been going on for more than a year, believe it or not, and we're only at about the halfway point. So, as is my wont, I took the initial idea and sort of ran with it in a way that ensured that it would end up being really, really labor intensive anyway, but, and you know, not complaining about that. That's just sort of how I've always operated. And so when I'm doing something, I very rarely do things out of convenience. If I'm doing something, I want to do it, you know, in the best way I can possibly do it. And though I really, really liked the idea of doing a recap episode, due in part to the fact that it's been so long since I recorded the earliest episodes of this series that even I've forgotten a lot of the stuff that we talked about in those episodes. And though I didn't find the time to go through all the episodes again, I think I got more or less the gist of everything that has happened in the series up to this point. And so as you'll soon see, what I did was I wrote a script for the recapping episodes 1 through 15, and then establishing the context for this episode in terms of the in-playthrough storylines. And another reason I wanted to do this recap episode is to make a little bit more apparent the direction that this series is going in terms of not only what we're going to be seeing and experiencing in the context of the playthrough, but also in terms of the in-playthrough storylines. So though Deso Penguin wasn't the only person to leave a comment to this effect, this is nevertheless what Deso Penguin said. I hope you have updated save states for other characters, since there's a huge amount of the Lord of Hollows questline that just got cut off by casual murder, and that lore needs to be explored, especially since basically every serious YouTuber I watch goes for some other ending, and so the questline of Londor gets ignored during actual playthroughs. Obviously, this becomes hugely significant in exploring Ashes of Ariandel as well. Henri's questline on a meta level takes on almost a prime directive kind of debate about the value of agency and intervention. By killing the pilgrim, Henri gets to follow on her own set of goals, defeating Aldrich in her world and fulfilling what she sees as her duty, only to end up becoming a maddened hollow, fulfilled but with her sanity lost. Or you can choose to allow the Londor questline to continue, have external forces, you and the rest of the Sable Church folk, step into her life, turn her onto another path, and by doing so, by all appearances, allow her sanity to be saved. Is it the right thing to allow her free will, or to use your superior knowledge of the consequences of her choices to save her by denying her the right to choose? So those are all very interesting questions and interesting problems, especially those raised in the latter half of this comment, but again, I wanted to make it apparent, or at least I wanted to try and make it more apparent, the direction that we're going in this playthrough. And so I hope that the forthcoming recap will help clarify my intentions with respect to how it is we're going to go about doing the rest of the playthrough. And so, you know, not to preempt myself too much, but something I didn't make explicit in the recap is that, or likely up to this point at all, is that Aegon of Astora, though he's the central player character in this playthrough, he isn't the only one that we're going to be following. There will be 3, possibly more, but likely 3 different point of view characters, if you will, through which we're going to be experiencing the story. Aegon is the central one, but we also have John Grimm the Reaper and a 3rd player character point of view that we've yet to meet. Aegon won't be the player character with whom we are going through every single area. There are going to be other player characters going through different areas. He will, of course, be the majority. He'll be going through the areas the majority of the time, whereas the other player characters will do a small handful of areas, but Aegon won't be the only one traversing the lands of Lothric, or the world of Dark Souls 3 more generally. So yeah, I hope that together with the forthcoming recap, clears up any anxiety or disappointment that any of you might have concerning whether or not I'm going to miss certain aspects of the playthrough. I might still miss things for sure because, you know, I've forgotten a lot about this game in the process of making this playthrough and not really getting a chance to play through the later parts of the game as we're sort of going through the earlier parts of them. But my intent is to ensure that we see everything. And so, in short, I figured that since this is more or less the halfway point of the series, that we would do Firelink Shrine 1, which involves us exploring Firelink more generally, in addition to the storyline that's been going on in the playthrough between John Grimm, between Aegon of Astora, Henri of Astora, Yuri of Londor, and the Firekeeper. And so if you're here just to hear me talk to JSF, that's cool too. But what we did was we had about a 45-minute long discussion on Skype, and after editing everything down, that turned into 3 sort of distinct 10-minute conversations. And so if you look in the video description below, as usual, there are timestamps to all of the sort of chapters of the episode, if you will. And you'll see that there are 3 different segments wherein JSF and I have a conversation about something. Our first conversation is about the Firekeepers and Hollowing. Our second conversation was about Firelink Shrine more generally. And our third conversation was about the Nestling of Firelink Shrine. That is the crows with whom you trade items. So if you're looking for those conversations, you'll find a timestamp to each of them in the video description below. If, however, you're sticking around for the whole episode, what we're going to do is we're going to start by recapping the series up to this point, episode by episode, in a way that, again, I've always hated clip episodes in television shows. So I wanted to make this different, I wanted to make it engaging, and I wanted it to not seem jarring within the normal flow of the series, such that, you know, you're watching an episode of Let's Talk Lore and you're not watching a, recap episode of Let's Talk Lore. So even though the action will be light in this episode, and by light I mean essentially non-existent, because we're just going to be spending our time in Firelink Shrine, so there's going to be an emphasis on the talk in Let's Talk Lore. But yeah, I've spent a fair bit of time working on this episode and thinking about it, so I hope that you enjoy watching it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. So without further ado, let's get started with the recap of Dark Souls 3 Let's Talk Lore, episodes 1 to 15. The first episode served mostly as an introduction to the series, wherein we had our first ever Fun with Definitions segment, and I mispronounced Udex a bunch of times, undoubtedly angering a bunch of people in the process. We then defeated Udex Gundyr, the Judge of Ash, which granted us the Coiled Sword and affirmed us as Chosen Ash, perhaps? We then proceeded to Firelink Shrine, a location whose name I suggested was more descriptive than specific. That is, Firelink Shrine is the name of a shrine dedicated to perpetuating the cycle of linking the fire. I also suggested that Firelink Shrine is one of the physical manifestations of the institution that has emerged around the idea of linking the fire. We then placed the Coiled Sword and discussed some of the do's and don'ts of the comments section. So if you're curious about how I go about choosing comments to feature on the show, go check out the first episode as I discussed this in great depth there. This also led into a discussion of some of the premises upon which this series is based, including the unassailable fact that it's simply impossible for anyone, myself included, to be apolitical, that is, without politics. But I think I covered this better in episode 3, so we will return to this point shortly. In the second episode, we started our exploration of the High Wall of Lothric, where we first encountered the Pus of Man, an enemy type and/or affliction that we'll be talking about a great deal during the latter half of this series. We also met and freed Greirat of the Undead Settlement, and we talked a little bit about how, with Greirat, FromSoft seems to have been attempting to subvert our expectations by intentionally leading us to draw parallels between the act of freeing him and the act of freeing Lothric from the Undead Parish in Dark Souls 1. Greirat gives us the blue tearstone throne ring and requests that we give it to a woman named Loretta from the Undead settlement. When we returned to Firelink, we explored how the physical manifestations of hollowing have changed from Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 3. In episode 3, we continued our exploration of the High Wall, where we met High Priestess Emma, who mentions that the Lords of Cinder have returned to their churning homes, converging at the base of Lothric Castle, which led us to begin in earnest our exploration of the cosmology of Dark Souls 3. And then, with the assistance of Lion Knight Albert and Swordmaster, we defeated Vort of the Boreal Valley, and returned once more to Firelink, where we discussed a comment which branded me as a cultural Marxist. Anything racist or sexist, confirmed cultural Marxist. What you mean is anything that conflicts with your inculcated hard left conditioning. Why can't people leave their shitty politics out of games? The way in which this series is structured is pedagogical through and through. I've approached it from a pedagogical perspective. The very nature of the series is informed by pedagogical ideas that I like and that I find compelling, but also because pedagogy doesn't just apply to educational contexts, it applies at large as well. And in order to explain what I mean, we're going to be talking really briefly about an article called Time for Action, Science Education for an Alternative Future by Derek Hodson of the Values are embedded in every aspect of the curriculum. Content, teaching, learning methods, and assessment and evaluation strategies are selected using criteria that reflect and embody particular value positions, whether teachers recognize it or not. Moreover, values can be promoted as much by what is omitted from discussion as by what is included. So that was Hodson, and this is from a reflection I wrote in part on this article, so I'm quoting myself here. Though I am loath to describe any fact as being unassailable, it can scarcely be denied that education is deeply and inherently political. And yet, as Derek Hodson points out, the prevailing view, widely shared among those responsible for curricula design, holds that education can and should be neutral with respect to values. On this view, dominant values, including that which paradoxically values value neutrality, are not values at all. Thus, for many of these individuals, the value-neutral curriculum is not only that which reifies the dominant value system, but also that which ensures our ongoing collective inability to identify these values as values. Indeed, as Hodson goes on to argue, values are not merely embedded in every aspect of the curriculum, they are also promoted as much by what is omitted from discussion as by what is included. So again, the context for that article and my reflection on it was curriculum design and education in general. But it equally applies here because any decision I make with respect to things to cover or not cover is itself a political decision. So all of this is to say that when this person says, why can't people leave their shitty politics out of games? The only reason this person sees the things I was saying as shitty politics or as politics in general is because they don't recognize their own position, their own values as values, nor do they recognize their own politics as politics. Everything is political. And so to insert discussion of political matters, of contentious and controversial matters, into a video game isn't to graft it onto something where it doesn't belong, because video games themselves are political. Video games raise political issues. They have politics. These games aren't programmed by disembodied spirits. Video games are programmed, they're marketed, they are tied to, they are embedded in politics. They don't exist outside of politics. So when someone says, why can't people leave their shitty politics out of games? What they're suggesting is that games are apolitical. And this suggestion is made on the basis, I think, of their inability to recognize their own politics as politics, their own values as values. In episode 4, we used the small Lothric banner, given to us in the previous episode by High Priestess Emma, to travel to the Undead settlement, an area I related to the confinement of Aboriginal communities to reserve lands in Canada. Before we entered the settlement proper, we also met Yoel of Londor, and agreed to allow him to serve us. We then caught our first glimpse of I help anytime, who, true to his name, helped us anytime, despite the fact that we had yet to even meet him. We also discovered, sadly, that Loretta had died. This was also where we first met a cathedral evangelist, and where we were first given a glimpse at what we called the Lothric bioeconomy. We later climbed into a cage that was strapped to the back of a hollow manservant, who then dropped us into the Pit of Hollows, containing an altar to the Moundmaker's Covenant, where we also find Holy Knight Hodrick. When we returned to Firelink, I provided a preliminary overview of what I called my treatise on the cosmology of Dark Souls 3, which I won't replay in full here, but here are some highlights. Takeaway, the crucial point here is that whereas in everyday life and in our daily lives, light, for all practical purposes, travels instantaneously. You turn on a light and you don't have to wait, 5 minutes or whatever for the light to turn on. It turns on immediately. So, but even though it seems at such a small scale in our daily lives that light doesn't have a speed, that is just on or off, that's it. It does in fact have a speed. And so turning finally to the notion of the Big Crunch, which is a term that I've mentioned previously but I've never actually properly explained. So the Big Crunch is one possible scenario for the ultimate fate of the universe, in which the metric expansion of space eventually reverses and the universe recollapses, ultimately ending as a black hole singularity, or causing a reformation of the universe, starting with another Big Bang. Sudden singularities and crunch or rip singularities at late times occur only for hypothetical matter with implausible physical properties. So what does all this mean for Dark Souls? It's really, really important to understand that clearly we have some preliminary understanding of what's happening. We really don't know. And in fact, it's impossible for us to know. Because, again, the time scales involved are so disproportionate to that of our own lives. We're talking tens of billions of years, and we live, if we're lucky, 80 or 90 years. So just as we'll never know, at least in our lifetimes, for certain whether or not a big crunch will happen. But let's say that we assume that the big crunch will happen. If, like in Dark Souls 3, the world starts at a singularity, and it seems to me that the world, or at least the present shape of it, started with the first flame, expanded outwards for Dark Souls 1 and 2, and then started closing in again, started drawing everything back towards it, just like we see at the killing of the first flame, then, one of several things might happen at that point. So the ultimate conclusion of the Dark Souls series, insofar as this is the last of the numbered Dark Souls games, the ultimate conclusion is, fittingly, open-ended. That is to say, it seems apparent that sooner or later a big crunch will take place. Where the open-endedness exists, however, is in what happens after that. Will the big crunch create another first flame? Once all of the matter is squished into a singularity, once the big crunch is complete, will we have another Big Bang? Will it be a big bounce? Will there be a big rip? In episode 5, we continued our exploration of the Undead settlement, beginning with our fight with the cursed rotted Greatwood. I pointed out that the hand which erupts out of the boss in its second phase is essentially identical to that of the Ulyssilian sorcerers from the Archtree of the Abyss DLC in Dark Souls 1. We then broke the news about Loretta to Greirat, accepted both Cornix of the Great Swamp and Irina of Carim into our service, before being serenaded by the kind words of Aegon of Carim. Shortly thereafter, we also happened upon Sigvard of Katarina, with whom we defeated a demon. Hi, friend.
I help anytime.
That you certainly do. Wait, hold on, I forgot. What is it that you do again?
I help anytime.
Like any time? Even in the middle of the night when you're sleeping?
I help anytime.
I can hear the crackling from here, the sound of my home, the painting of Arendelle, burning away. When the world rots, we set it afire. for the sake of the next world. It's the one thing we do right, unlike those fools on the outside.
Episode 6 was published following the release of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, so though the episode was nominally about the Road of Sacrifices, we also spent a fair bit of time re-examining some of our earlier discussions in light of what the DLC revealed about the game's broader narrative. We also spent some time catching up with NPCs at Firelink, including Ringfinger Leonhard, who we've yet to really talk about in any level of depth, but who we will be discussing at length in a much later episode. We also spoke further with Yoel of Londor, who convinced us, as a bearer of the Dark Sign, to allow him to draw out what he described as our true strength. This set in motion a number of important plot points in this playthrough, including that which is at the center of this very episode. That is, from Aegon's perspective, Yoel had deceived him into surrendering his sense of control, agency, and sovereignty over his own body. By drawing out his true strength, Yoel had also opened up a dark hole, as it is called in the Japanese text, on Aegon's body. This became more noticeable to Aegon as time wore on, as his physical appearance began to change, and the nightmares he occasionally experienced became not only more frequent, but also considerably more traumatic. Before we could set out on the Road of Sacrifices proper, we had to dispatch our first Outrider knight. We then briefly discussed the Corvians, both within the context of the Painted World and outside of it, including the roles played by elders and storytellers in Corvian culture and society, as well as the importance of land and the problems associated with being divorced from one's own land. We then happened upon Archtree of Astora and her traveling companion Horus the Hushed. Aegon and Archtree agreed to help one another, should either of them happen upon the other in a time of need. By contrast, when Aegon returns to Firelink, he is greeted by Cirrus of the Sunless Realms, who describes herself as a former servant of the divinity, but who is also far less eager to make new friends than was Archtree of Astora. We also spent a fair bit of time in this episode speculating about the Deep, its significance, and its nature. This was, however, before JSF released his video on the subject, which nothing short of revolutionized my understanding of the Deep. So I won't replay any of those discussions here, but you're welcome to revisit this episode if you're curious about how we imagined the Deep before we had the benefit of having viewed JSF's video on the subject. In episode 7, we began our exploration of the Crucifixion Woods. Among the many items scattered across the swamp, we find the Great Swamp Pyromancy Tome and a Conjurator set, but not on one corpse, on two. That is, we find here the corpses of a master and her apprentice, one of the many dualities or pairings we encounter throughout Dark Souls 3. I also used this as an entry point for a discussion about my understanding of critical pedagogy in general and co-intentional education in particular. There's a bit of rambling in this segment, to be sure, but I also think this provides a very good overview of how these ideas serve as the basis for this series and its community-driven characteristics. We then discuss Black Knights, their origins in both textual and extra-textual terms, and their presence in the world of Dark Souls 3. Upon our return to Firelink, we explored some of the issues which arise when attempting to reconcile the multiplicity of languages through which we understand and experience Dark Souls 3. As a means of illustrating the embeddedness of language in culture, we discussed the 2016 film Arrival. Here too, I won't replay the entirety of this discussion, but here are some highlights, including spoilers for the film Arrival. So this movie is based loosely off of the idea of linguistic relativity. So the principle of linguistic relativity holds that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview or cognition, popularly known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or Whorfianism. The principle is often defined to include two versions. The strong version says that language determines thought, and that linguistic categories limit and determine cognitive categories, whereas the weak version says that linguistic categories and usage only influence thought and decisions. But the physicist Ian Donnelly, he describes it like this, that if you immerse yourself in a culture, a foreign culture, and in the language of that culture, then you can rewire your brain. So if you see my video on Fallout 4, FF7, and Brainhood, then you know that I have a lot of problems with the notion or the assumption that we are our brains, and that's all we are. So that's how they express it in this movie. And because of how talented a linguist Louise is, Louise Banks, the main character, she is able to not necessarily rewire her brain, but to perceive time as these aliens who are called heptapods, how the heptapods perceive time. And that is, they don't have linear time. They see the past, the present, and the future all at once. Their purpose on Earth is to teach humans their language so that humans can help them with some threat that remains unknown 3,000 years from the time, quote unquote, that the movie takes place. So we get to a certain point in the movie where they've been doing this for months. Like, there's a big jump in time at a certain point. And yeah, it's a long movie already, but the jump in time actually works quite well too. And, you know, it's clear that they've been at it for a while and they have like a rapport with the aliens and stuff, but they're not quite there to try and figure out what's going on. And everyone around the world is getting antsy because there are, I think, 12 of these spaceships around the world. It's not just one in the US, like they're scattered all over the place. Almost every single one of these sort of government military encampments, they have, like translators and people trying different approaches to try and communicate with the aliens. And almost all of them interpreted the aliens' intentions, the alien language. They interpreted the sign for language, that they were there to give humanity the gift of their language, the gift to see all of time unfolded before them. But almost all of the human translators translated language or gift into weapon. Even the main character, when they're flying to the spacecraft for the first time, the physicist Ian, he reads the introduction from her book where she describes language as the first weapon that is drawn in a conflict. So you can see that the various ways in which culture is embedded in language. And though, you know, this is a movie that in episode 8, we happen upon the study of Orbeck of Vinheim, who offered to serve us, but only in exchange for knowledge in the form of scrolls detailing sorcery's secrets, to which Aegon reluctantly agreed. With the assistance of Aegon of Carim, we then defeated a crystal sage, who we discover is but half of yet another pairing, and that though his twin brother continues to serve as a spiritual guide to the scholars of the Grand Archives, this particular crystal sage left the Grand Archives to forge an alliance with the Undead Legion. We then continued along the road of sacrifices until we reached the Cleansing Chapel, where we first came across Slave Knight Gale, whom we'll obviously be discussing in great detail at a later date. In episode 9, we spent most of our time exploring the areas surrounding the Cathedral of the Deep proper, an area that, as we discovered during the recording of the episode itself, lies atop a layer of what we later came to call deep tar, which we find under the stone tiles and poking through the exterior walls all around the cathedral itself. We then explored the cathedral graveyard and questioned who, if anyone, might be reanimating the reanimated corpses which inhabit the graveyard and surrounding areas. We also tried to piece together Henri and Horace's escape from the cathedral, including an attempt to pin down the specific graves out of which they might have looted their gear. I Help Anytime helped us again, and when we eventually found our way into the cathedral interior, we caught our very first glimpse of the body of water, which appears to be the Deep itself.
I help anytime.
Oh, you certainly do, friend. Thank you, it's been a long time.
I help anytime.
You certainly do help anytime. How long has it been? Has it been like 3 weeks or something?
I help anytime.
Really?
I help.
Has it been that long? It's been like 2 months?
I help anytime.
JSF and Cassidy have joined us for episode 10 as we set out to explore the interior areas of the Cathedral of the Deep. Poisonous things that are happening here.
Well, it looked like, you can see in the middle of the two pools, there's a pool that's clear. So I'm assuming that originally it was all water. It was all clear water. And like the thing you're looking at now, this sort of vomiting statue, that probably originally just vomited out water. Because there's a big thing in Japanese spiritual beliefs about running water being a source of purity. So the way I took those statues is that, like, people would sit under them or something and the water would drip out and it would, like, wash away impurities from them. And But because the water in the cathedral's become so disgusting and polluted, now they're vomiting out poison.
So it's gotten into, like, metaphorically and literally, like, into the plumbing of the entire cathedral.
That's basically what I'm taking from them, yeah, because I don't understand. Like, it seems bizarre as the choice of trap. Like, it seems more like... The cathedral's not like a place you would set traps or anything. It seems much more like this is something that happened later.
The curse kind of follows a sort of conservation of mass kind of process.
Mm-hmm.
The curse is never cured. It can just be pushed off like a shell game.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
and we'll see that later in the episode, too.
Right, and we'll see that later in the episode, but Eldritch spiders are creatures that eat the curse of high-level members of the church. Which makes probably sense that they inflict curse, that they have little messenger-looking guys on their backs, because the curse is a wholly human thing. The curse is a human kind of affliction. So if they're feeding these spiders their curse to keep them afloat...
It was here that we met what appeared to be Siegfried of Katarina, but what was actually Unbreakable Patches in disguise. This led us to the hidden bedchamber of Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth.
In the video I made, I talked about Rosaria with reference to an old Japanese myth, which is similar to the Persephone story that people might be familiar with from Greek mythology, and also the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, which you might be familiar with as well. It's the story of a goddess who dies, and her soul goes to the underworld, and then her husband travels to the underworld to try and get her back. But when he gets there, because she has been in the underworld, which is this dark, corrupt, disgusting place, kind of like the cathedral is, she's become corrupted by it, and he can't bring her back. And when he refuses to bring her back, she declares war, basically against the gods, and she becomes this sort of like death goddess figure. And Rosaria is, I think, something similar to that, where she's this formerly holy character who's been brought to this disgusting place. It's corrupted her. There's been this attempt to sort of steal her away. You see with the barred doors and with the sort of like stake things that have been hammered into the walls around her. And that kind of explains why, on the one hand, her servants are clerics, and she gives you one of Guinevere's miracles. She's very holy, but she's also overseeing what's basically the Darkwraith Covenant, because she has sworn revenge again. Her followers have sworn revenge against the other gods who abandoned her.
Siegfried, as it turned out, managed to become trapped naked in a well, so we purchased his armor back from Patches and returned it to him. We then summoned Henri and Horus to help us defeat the Deacons of the Deep. Upon returning to Firelink, Yoel of Londor declared us Lord, and we later ascended to the top of the shrine bell tower, where we found the corpse of a woman containing a tainted Firekeeper soul, as it's called in the Japanese text. Our descent was then halted by Patches, who had locked the gate to the bell tower behind us. After making up with Patches, Aegon notices that Yoel has died, and that a woman who introduces herself as Yuria of Londor is standing nearby. Yuria explains that we have become Lord of Hollows, that the people of Londor now serve us, and she claims that Orbeck of Vinheim intends to usurp our lordship. She then suggests that we murder him in order to prevent this. Aegon, of course, refuses Yuria. So it was at this point that we were first introduced to another Lord of Hollows, one who is considerably more amenable to such suggestions. That is John Grimm the Reaper.
It is folly to claim lives recklessly, friend. Do not be tempted. No matter the victim's stature, every killing has a consequence. Even as I bloodied my hands, I never realized this simple truth. There I was, the very definition of a fool. Come again.
In episode 11, John Grimm saw fit to bestow corrupted divine tomes upon Irina of Courland, who then complained about little creatures nibbling at her in the darkness, and who was later carried away from Firelink Shrine by Aegon. Furious at the fact that John Grimm hadn't kept his promise to keep Irina safe, Aegon then met his end at the hands of John Grimm. Irina later mistakes John Grimm for Aegon of Courland, whose gauntlets John Grimm had started wearing as a sort of trophy to commemorate that particular reaping. Irina then asks to be killed. John Grimm, of course, obliges. Meanwhile, Aegon begins exploring the swamp area of Farron Keep, where he sets about completing the Undead Legion's initiation ritual, which demands that Undead Legion hopefuls snuff out the flames of 3 altars in order to open up the door to Wolf's Blood. We spent a fair bit of time in this episode speculating about the images depicted on each of these altars, the first 2 of which appeared to simply depict the Witches of Isleth and Gravelord Nito. The depiction on the 3rd altar, however, was considerably more contentious. It appeared at the time to depict the 4 kings of New Londo, but that didn't seem to make any sense, as the 4 kings only ever possessed a shard of Gwyn's soul, and unlike the Witch of Isleth and Gravelord Nito, they never had a soul of their own. As many people have since pointed out, this 3rd altar seems to depict the Pygmy Lords, as revealed by the Ringed City DLC. It was also in this episode that Hunter M left a comment which has since served as the basis for my understanding of the mechanics of hollowing in Dark Souls 3. Also soulless? So if we don't have a soul, what is inside of us? What keeps us from going hollow? It's pus, whatever sedimentary substance of the dark soul that hasn't yet burned away, or will never burn away, has built up inside our body, and it forcibly keeps us human. It fills our bosom and keeps our body from hollowing. So what do you do when there's too much pus, a humor, in the body? You cut a hole and you let it, as in bloodletting. Yoel of Londor pokes a dark sigil into our chest, from which the built-up abyssal pus drips, and because it is allowed to drain, we can slowly become more hollowed out when we die, quite literally. I think it's possible that the Purging Stone actually works in reverse of how it sounds. Rather than us filling it with curse, it is filling us with pus. The Purging Stone is created from a processed human body. The deep sludge we see in the cathedral is made from processed human bodies, though much more haphazardly, simply rotting or digested. After all, how do you bestow hollowness, emptiness onto something? You drain it. And the stone does not cure our hollow, only reduces or delays it, as though we've been refilled but will empty out again. What if being overfilled with abyssal pus causes the pus to dry and petrify when it's exposed to open air? This is gross, but actual pus becomes dry and crusty when it sits still after leaking from an infected. We see this in Archdeacon MacDonald and even as far back as the 4 kings from Dark Souls 1, who had massive growths over their chests and shoulders that looked like petrified wood growing from the same spot we see on our torso when hollowed. It could even explain the rocky petrified look of the Lothric drakes, despite not being true stone dragons, seemingly born from pus of man. This would explain petrification as a status effect and why the exposure to the Deacon's fog kills us with curse. It's the substance that cures hollow curse, but so concentrated that the medicine becomes a poison. In Dark Souls, all about that dark. They are the polar opposite of hollow. They are so full they're bursting at the seams. Archdeacon MacDonald's eyes are overflowing with hairy abyssal roots of dark, body so much with processed human bodies, trying to melt like Aldrich. Most likely there is a rivalry between the Sable Church and Church Faith, as it's implied it was based in the Way of White after Sullivan's rise to power, and the DLC implies there's tensions between the Sable, that is Black, Church and the Way of White. Could the tale of the Firekeeper returning from the Abyss to ease the suffering of a cursed hollow be something antithetical to the Sable Church belief, and did said Firekeeper and our own do so by resealing the hollow's body so the pus can not drain? Episode 12 begins with an exploration of the area lying above the Old Wolf of Farron bonfire, where we find, and eventually slay, a stray demon. Back at Firelink Shrine, we find that Cirrus has returned, and that, having heard some good things about us, she is now far more amenable to working with us. We then return to the Undead settlement, only to find that I Help Anytime had recently been visited by John Grimm, the Reaper. We then returned to Farron Keep, entered the door to Wolf's Blood, came across some more Dark Race, and defeated the Abyss Watchers. We then discussed the legacy of Artorias, how this kind of historical forgetting occurs, both in the game and in the real world, and how this informed the apparent mandate of the Undead Legion of Farron in general, and the Abyss Watchers in particular. But he was just helping us anytime. What happened, friend? In episode 13, we learn that the altar the Abyss Watchers were protecting actually provides passage to the catacombs of Karthus, where we find countless reanimated skeleton swordsmen, some of whom make heavy use of weaponized, disembodied humanity. We also come across Archtree of Astora, who expresses dismay at having become separated from Horus. Aegon agrees to keep his eyes peeled for Horus, but finds no trace of him in the catacombs proper. Aegon later happens upon another altar, atop which sits a chalice made out of a human skull. Upon touching the chalice, he is seemingly transported to an abyssal type area, where he is confronted by High Lord Volnir. Upon defeating Volnir, Aegon finds himself back at the altar, where a passage to Irithyll of the Boreal Valley reveals itself. Before forging ahead, Aegon turns back to search once again for Horus. In the process, he finds a hidden path, which leads him to an abandoned tomb. Back at Firelink, we read a very interesting comment left by Yosaho concerning the central theme of Dark Souls 3. On the theme of Dark Souls 3, die in peace. This is the main theme of Dark Souls 3 that many people don't get and disregard it as dead equals bad. If you think like a normal person, oh, no good can come from dead. As long as you live, surely happiness will come. But you have to consider this. How long have people in this world been living? 100 if not 1,000 years. The NPCs in this game are just like the fire itself. Everything has its time, and that time is not forever. Departing might be sad, but it is by no means bad. Just like what Cirrus says, at last I can die. The same goes for I Help Anytime and many others except Archtree. I consider Lord of Hollows to be her good ending. So yeah, that is really well said once again. And in light of the Ashes of Ariandel, I had these two slides prepared so that I could eventually discuss them in the context of the DLC, because the first DLC was the one that actually brought me around to this way of seeing the game, of this manner of framing the story as one of not just entropy and decay and death and things ending, but of that being okay, of coming to peace, coming to terms with that. So I'll just briefly read this thing I had prepared just because it'll be so long until we get to it, and then we'll return to it when we get to the Painted World. So I'm quoting my own reflection here. Jonathan Lear's Radical Hope opens with the story of Plenty Ku. Prior to his death, Ku, the last great chief of the Crow Nation, is said to have reached out across the clash of civilizations and shared his story with a white man, Frank Linderman. This resulted in a book that, according to Lear, not only provides a marvelous account of the exploits of a young man growing up at a time when the Crow were still a vibrant tribe of nomadic hunters, but also suggests that Ku and Linderman had become good friends. And yet, as Lear points out, Linderman was unable to get Plenty Ku to talk about anything that had happened after the Crow were confined to a reservation. After this, nothing happened, Ku said. So haunted by this utterance was Lear that he set about trying to discern what, if anything, Ku might have been trying to say. If we take him at his word, he seems to be saying that there was an event or happening, the buffaloes going away, something Plenty Ku can refer to as this, such that after this, there are no more happenings. Or to get the temporality correct, Plenty Ku came to see, as he looked back, that there was a moment after such that after this, nothing happened. It would seem to be the retrospective declaration of a moment when history came to an end, but what could it mean for history to exhaust itself? Lear later goes on to argue that the question is what it would be for Plenty Ku to be a witness to a peculiar form of human vulnerability. If there is a genuine possibility of happenings breaking down, it is one with which we all live. We are all familiar with the thought that as human creatures we are by nature vulnerable, but the vulnerability we are concerned with here is of a different order. We seem to acquire it as a result of the fact that we essentially inhabit a way of life. Humans are by nature cultural animals. We necessarily inhabit a way of life that is expressed in culture, but our way of life is vulnerable in various ways. The suggestion I want to explore is that if our way of life collapsed, things would cease to happen. What could this mean? And what would it be to be a witness to this breakdown? Lear concedes that his interpretation of Ku's utterance is bleak, while also pointing out that he does not want to foreclose on human hopefulness. To that end, Lear suggests that while Plenty Ku's words were meant to signal the death of the Crow subject, they were also meant to clear the ground for a rebirth. On this view, Ku reached out to Linderman as a means to preserve in writing the basis upon which future generations might develop new forms of Crow subjectivity. Put more simply, Lear invokes subjectivity here as a means of subverting the sense of finality generally associated with death. At issue here, in other words, was not the death of a culture, full stop, but that of the possibility of forming oneself as a Crow subject, as it is traditionally understood. Reframed in this manner, death represents an opening up and not a closing off of possibilities. It follows for Lear that Ku's utterance was not an expression of despair, it was the only way to avoid it. So yeah, I think that the parallels there to what is happening in the story in Dark Souls 3 more generally, as well as in the painted world of Ariandel in particular, are pretty obvious. In episode 14, Aegon discovered that the abandoned tomb actually leads to what is nominally known as the Smoldering Leg, but which is actually revealed to be the ruins of Lost Izalith, the birthplace of pyromancy. Hopeful that he might find Horus alive and well, Aegon is disappointed to find only the remains of Henri's traveling companion. Horus had only recently met his end at the hands of John Grimm, but unbeknownst to Aegon, this particular reaping was not one of malice, but one of mercy, as Horus had completely succumbed to the effects of hollowing, and was but a mere shell of his former self when John Grimm found him. We then discussed the Karthus sandworm as an example of body horror, aided in no small part by a very interesting comment left by Centimeter Worm. We then spent a fair bit of time traversing the ruins and exploring in the process a number of the references made to Dark Souls 1 and 2. This included an exploration of the Daughters of Chaos and Black Iron Tarkus from Dark Souls 1, as well as Raimi, the Fume Knight from Dark Souls 2. The latter exploration led to a discussion of the historical meaning and significance of the term savage, and its use in establishing what it means to be modern or civilized under colonialism. We then fought and defeated the Old Demon King with the help of Nightslayer Sorig and Great Swamp Cuculus. Ultimately, we learned that the Chaos Flame has faded, though its remnants continue to live on in a weakened form in the likes of the Old King's Great Hammer. Back at Firelink, Uriah of Londor notifies Aegon that he has been betrothed to Henri of Astora. In the process, Uriah notes that Henri is currently being guided by a fellow of hers. Aegon, still reeling about the death of Horus, begins to suspect that both he and Henri are being manipulated by Uriah. Nevertheless, Aegon consents to the union so as not to raise Uriah's suspicions, but he resolves to speak with Henri first, so that they might get to the bottom of all this together before any such ceremony can take place. The Karthus sandworm is one of the plethora of examples of body horror in Dark Souls 3, and is a slightly subtler one because you have to look very close to actually see where the horror element is, which is kind of hard when being shot by ballistae and fried by lightning. If you examine it, you can see that the flesh under the sandworm's exoskeleton and inside its maw consists of contorted human faces and skeletal limbs reaching out between the ribs. Centimeter Worm provided, some great screenshots per this post on Reddit, but I will try to see if we can get a closer look so that we can get that in motion in a moment. Episode 15 begins with one of Aegon's nightmares, which have become considerably more frequent since he became Lord of Hollows, and which seem increasingly to depict Uriah of Londor as a master manipulator, and he and Henri as her puppets. He doesn't fully understand these dreams, as they seem occasionally to have prophetic qualities. This dream, for instance, features Aegon attacking a statue, and ends with him relinquishing his lordship, but he doesn't know whether this is simply a symptom of his traumatic past, or perhaps something more. Time is convoluted, after all. We began our exploration of Irithyll of the Boreal Valley by surveying the skyline, which features streamers of light which appear strikingly similar to that of the Aurora Borealis. It was on this basis that I suggested that Irithyll seems to be encased by a magnetosphere of sorts, which we can only pass through if we have the small doll in our possession, which we received for defeating the Deacons of the Deep, and which, as Cassidov noted for us, hints at Pontiff Solivan's origins as a denizen of the Painted World. After ganking Creighton the Wanderer together with Cirrus of the Sunless Realms, we encounter the Phantom of an Outrider Knight. We also find that the dark biting insects, which we learned about through Irina of Karim earlier on, are present in huge quantities here in Irithyll, where they have not only chewed through the weapons of the Pontiff's knights, but also the bodies of the Irithyllian slaves. These insects, we later learned, appear to originate from the deep, that which also seems to have intoxicated Doris, the deranged evangelist, whom we also encounter here in Irithyll. When we reach the Church of Yorshka, we find Henri of Astora, and it was at this point that Aegon started to piece together what was going on. In a somewhat uncharacteristic fit of rage, Aegon not only murders the servant of Uria, whom he deems responsible for separating Henri and Horus, but he also kills Uria of Londor herself later in the episode. Uria's dying words then prompted a lengthy discussion of Darkstalker Koth in particular, and the Primordial Serpents in general. We then faced off against Creighton the Wanderer a second time, before proceeding to explore the Irithyll soundscape, followed by the Irithyll wetlands and the Irithyll sewers. We then happened upon and shared a toast with Sigvard of Katarina, who name drops the profane capital and mentions that he has a grave promise that he needs to keep. Needless to say, we'll be seeing him again very soon. Then we came across several single spawn Silver Knights, and as a consequence of having relinquished our lordship, we were invaded by the Londor Paleshade. Finally, with the help of Archtree of Astora and Blackhand Goddard, we defeated Pontiff Sullivan. And though Pontiff Sullivan may be dead in our world, his considerable influence over the landscape is such that we will continue to discuss him in much greater detail in the coming episodes. Is that as we walk through Irithyll, we see what are effectively replays of the various different Outrider Knights leaving Irithyll. So what do I mean when I say that they're effectively replays? Well, what we're seeing when we see these apparitions, these phantoms, these ghosts of the Outrider Knights as they're leaving Irithyll, what we're seeing is basically the exact same thing that we see when we see player phantoms, when we see player ghosts that look like this. Because contrary to what I used to think about these phantoms, when you see the phantom of another player, I used to get upset when I would wave at the phantom and they would always ignore me. I'm like, why? Our worlds are coming into contact with each other. It's a special thing. We should celebrate it. But little did I know that not only are they not necessarily seeing my phantom at the same time that I'm seeing their phantom, but also that the phantom that you're seeing isn't of a player who is necessarily standing in that same spot at that very moment. How it works, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm reasonably certain that I'm right about this, is that when you see a player phantom, you're seeing them at some point in the last, I don't know what the precise interval of time is, but at some point in the last half hour or something like that, that player was in that spot and doing whatever it is that you see them do. But in this case, what we're seeing is the Outrider Knights leaving Irithyll in order to go do whatever it is that Outrider Knights do. Just Outrider Knight things, I guess. And this is something we'll talk about in a different context shortly, but what I absolutely love about this is in how it brings close together gameplay and story. That brings us to the present, episode 16, which began with a lengthy, multi-layered nightmare, which not only leaves Aegon too distraught to proceed to Irithyll Dungeon, but which also makes clear to him that if there's one person in this world that he can trust, it's the Firekeeper. So Aegon returns to Firelink to confide in the Firekeeper and to ask for her advice, in hopes that she might be able to help him cope with the many issues he's currently having. The Firekeeper reminds Aegon that he had previously given her a soul, which once belonged to another Firekeeper, but which had also become tainted by the dark sigils she took into herself in service to her own champion. Undeterred by the seemingly corrupted nature of her sister's soul, the Firekeeper took the tainted Firekeeper soul into her own bosom, insisting in the process that she will understand, because they are both Firekeepers after all. Nevertheless, the Firekeeper went on to ask her sister for forgiveness, and has presumably been preparing ever since for this very day, when her duty would demand not only that she relieve Aegon of the dark sigils tainting his soul, but also that she take this burden unto herself. So this seems like as good a time as any to talk a little bit to JSF about what's going on here, to try and understand a little bit about the mechanics of hollowing and about our relationship with the Firekeeper and how it is that she's able to heal us of our dark sigil. So the context for this discussion really quickly is at the center of this episode is the fact that the Aegon, character Aegon, is like having trouble with nightmares and PTSD and stuff like that, in part because he felt like he was violated by Yoel of Londor and the Sable Church of Londor. So he's got the tainted Firekeeper soul, as I understand it's called in the Japanese text. So he gives the Firekeeper soul to the Firekeeper, who says that she's going to, I think, take it into her bosom, she says. You've described the Firekeeper in the past as a spiritual coffee filter. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the mechanics of that and like what is happening not only when you give the Firekeeper soul to the Firekeeper, but also when you request that she I can't remember what it's exactly called. Is it heal Dark Sigil?
I have not played this game for 6 months. I've forgotten almost everything about it.
That's okay, me too, but in any case, so like when the Dark Sigil is being healed, do you have any thoughts on like the mechanics of that?
You know, like in Dark Souls 1, there's Quellag's sister and she's in Blighttown. And she's described as like she's sucking all of the
blight pus,
the blight pus out of the Blighttown into herself as like a means of purifying it. That's kind of what I think the Firekeeper is doing here, where like the Dark Sigil is accumulating on your body, and what she's doing is, instead she can't destroy it, but she's like taking it out of you and taking it into herself as a means of removing it from you, like purging you. But you can't get rid of this thing permanently. She just sucks it up into herself, and presumably when she dies, she'll leave behind a soul like that.
When you get her to, I think it's called heal Dark Sigil.
Yeah.
Then the Dark Sigils are actually removed from your person, though, aren't they?
They're removed from you, but they're given to her, presumably. Like she's taken that in.
Touche.
That's what the soul says. It's like she soothed and accepted the Dark Sigil, which tainted her soul. So it's like she sucked that out of you and into her. So it's like it hasn't been destroyed, it's been transferred from one body to another. So that's now presumably in her soul. So when she dies, she'll leave behind another like dirty Firekeeper soul that another Firekeeper will pick up.
Why do you think it is that they need the Firekeeper soul to do that to begin with?
I don't know.
Because it seems really strange, right? Like, it's almost like with the eyes, you know, when you give them the eyes of a Firekeeper, she says that Firekeepers were never meant to have this, and then she's able to see things that she wasn't otherwise able to see. So presumably Firekeepers aren't meant to have eyes, because with eyes they can see the possibility of an Age of Dark. And so I guess presumably something similar is happening here, where she can't see the possibility of her taking the Dark Sigils off of you and taking them into herself, unless she sees a Firekeeper soul that has done something similar. Maybe?
Well, it might almost be like when she takes it into herself, that's like the possibility of doing that is held within that soul as well. So she's like absorbing the essence of the last Firekeeper that did it. So it's like passing on that ability almost.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess, you know, maybe it's just a gameplay thing or something, but I was wondering about the fact that, like, I guess we loot the Estus ring and the Firekeeper set from another set of bodies that are, like, sort of in the tower.
There's that huge pile of... it's communicating that, like, this is very, very, very far into the future from Dark Souls 1 and 2. But, like, there's just hundreds... presumably of these dead Firekeepers just dumped in this tower. And you can see that, like, at the top of it, they're all in these very nice coffins, and then by the bottom, they're just dumping them. Because presumably it's just happening so many times that they're just running out of space.
Yeah, well, it's just you know, the continuation of this cycle over and over and over again of linking the fire.
Yeah. I'm reading her dialogue now, and it doesn't explain anything. It just says, like, let this find its place within my bosom, and that's it.
And she apologizes as well to... the Firekeeper whose soul she's taking.
Yeah.
She says to the Ashen One, like, don't worry, she will understand. She's my sister after all.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that there's almost like a hesitation there in terms of, you know, the Ashen One seemingly knows that this is something that's taboo and that shouldn't necessarily be done, I guess.
Yeah.
Because in the context, like we had a comment earlier in the series from Hunter M who articulated this very well, but like, because my understanding of hollowing is essentially that, you know, you have the Dark Sigil, and then out of the Dark Sigil, or as it's called in the Japanese text, which I think is a much better word for it is, or phrase for it is, Dark Hole, I believe.
Yeah, and the dark sign is the dark ring.
And with the dark hole, it's, you know, the pus of man is leaking out of you, and so literally making you hollow over time the more you die, right?
Yeah, that seems to be what's going on.
I've been wondering about the mechanics of the Firekeeper. Like, it's interesting that we don't necessarily see any difference with her after she's already healed the Dark Sigil.
Well, she doesn't really do very much at all, really. Like, she's a pretty, like, she doesn't have much of an arc or anything. She's just sort of there. Like, I guess they can't, for gameplay reasons, really do much with the Firekeeper, because otherwise you would ruin your ability to level up and things like that.
But even thinking back to Dark Souls 1, if we judge by the pre-release footage, so I was looking for the previous episode, I was looking for the footage.
You're turning into me now.
I know. What's up with that? Well, I was looking for the footage from the first trailer for Dark Souls 1 of... Right. Gonna be watching all the pre-release stuff now.
Yeah.
I was looking at the footage of the Quiet Resolve gesture. You know, where the Elite Knight is walking away.
And they walk away from the bonfire, and he does this like the Quiet Resolve gesture, and you can see Tarkus there as well, presume.
And you can also see... And you can also see a Firekeeper there, just sort of sitting by the fire. So I can't remember whether I even pointed this out in the previous episode. I think I might have needed to cut it out. But am I crazy for thinking that there probably was at one point a Firekeeper supposed to be in Dark Souls 1 as well?
Well, Dark Souls 1, the Firekeeper equivalent was going to be Priscilla.
Wasn't that just the pre-release, or not pre-release, but the beta in terms of the Painted World?
No, it went far enough that she's got, like, all these unused animations, and, like, it looks like she was going to be, like, a Maiden in Black kind of equivalent. I don't know how far along it got, but it got far enough along that there's a lot of unused Priscilla stuff. She's called, her ID in the game files is Heroine, which is what they always use for, the kind of Firekeeper character.
Yeah, because it's really curious, because Miyazaki has said that, like, if this game is about anyone, it's about the Firekeepers.
Yeah.
Do you put much stock in that? No.
One of the things that the Ringed City sort of like cemented that was like, it was always kind of an idea since the first game, but we kind of know now, is that like the whole point of the dark sign, the dark sigil thing, not oh god, here's stupid names for things. The whole point of the dark sign, not the dark sigil.
Yeah.
The dark sign that brands the undead is. That is like that's this hole out of which the pus of man's leaking, but because it's got that like burning around it, the fire is keeping the pus in check.
Yep.
You can see that in the Ringed City, because it's all about, like, you see there's the Herald Knights who went to the Ringed City and they got all dark souled up, and they've like bloated into these weird like tree root monsters because they can't contain themselves. But then at the same time you've got the what are they called? I think they're just called the Ringed Knights, and they're just they have maintained their human shape, and they have in the center of them they have this burning ring, because presumably that like there's reference to their armor being blessed with fire, and the idea is like all that fire, the fire in the Age of Fire and the bonfires, is what's like keeping the dark soul in check, which goes back to the stuff with the evangelists like burning you and all this stuff, like how the pus of man can be burned out with fire, and you also get that in Ariandel when they talk about the follower torch being used to burn this pus of man dark soul out of you. So the idea, I think, is that the dark sigil, which is not the dark sign, because it doesn't have that burning ring around it, it's almost like that's helping the dark soul kind of like come out and manifest in a new way.
Well, because it's not burning on its way out.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it doesn't affect the Firekeeper because she's so intimately linked with fire that it's not going to work.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just it's you know, I can't help but feel that with a lot of this stuff that, you know, certainly some of it was intentionally left open-ended, but at the same time, I do feel like there's still some stuff missing that, you know, we haven't quite been able to tease out yet.
what's complicating it is that stuff may have been intentionally left open in Dark Souls 1.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in Dark Souls 3, and in that period of time we've had Tanamura, and in this game, Tanamura and Okano add their own stuff to the game. So it's not like Miyazaki's coming back to finish something he just did in Dark Souls 1. Like, all this other stuff's been added to that on top of what he did. So it's difficult, especially with this one where you have 3 credited directors working together, to kind of figure out like where things overlap.
And when it's very obvious that they all worked on very different parts of the game, and that they weren't necessarily working together on the same parts.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's not clear to what degree they weren't working together, and things like, because you have like things are quite heavily tied into Irothil, which seems very much like that's Miyazaki's baby, because it's very much like it's Anor Londo and Yharnam fused together into one thing, almost literally.
Yeah. Yep.
But then, like, that's tied into places like Demon Ruins, which, you know, is a part of Dark Souls 1, but here it looks like it's part of Dark Souls 2 in terms of its level design. Calling Demon Ruins Chalice Dungeon is an insult to Chalice Dungeons.
Yeah. That's not unfair. That really isn't unfair. So before we go about healing the Dork Sigil, I wanted to talk a little bit about a comment that was left by a user named Treemaster Bob, who writes, "Love that intro. Most never stop and think that the player character would have nightmares from past encounters, let alone sleep. This adds some depth to what's basically a blank slate for us to experience the world through. We play mostly as a killing machine, never stopping to think of horrors such a life might reap. Well done." Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. So I wanted to speak a little bit more about this, about sleep in general, and about how it is I came to conceive of that aspect of the in-playthrough storyline. And in order to do so, I need to talk a little bit about some personal things. So if that's not your cup of tea, then you can always skip ahead to the next segment using the timestamps in the video description below. But I think it's important to understand and to acknowledge that in fiction, though this might not always be true, authors tend to write themselves, whether consciously or otherwise. They tend to write themselves into the protagonists of their story. And Aegon of Astora is obviously no different. I've spoken a lot about Aegon of Astora, the player character, and about Aegon of Astora as sort of my YouTube pseudonym, and, you know, about myself as sort of separate entities. And in many ways they are very different, but in many ways they're also very much the same. I don't generally put on airs. I'm not really that type of person, but you know, there are certain aspects of my personality and my day-to-day life that, you know, I prefer to keep private. Just as there are certain aspects of the build and of the character Aegon of Astora that resemble me, and other aspects that maybe don't. Aegon of Astora is much more willing and able to commit violence on other people or monsters or things like that than I imagine I ever would be in the real world, just to take one example. But sleep and dreams and nightmares have long been a thing for me. I should, of course, give my usual disclaimer here in pointing out that I'm not a scientist, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, not a medical doctor, or any of those things. So all the things that I'm going to be talking about in this segment are informed either by my own personal experience, my own situated knowledge, in addition to, you know, maybe a few things from my studies, but mostly from my own experience, my own understanding of things, because my understanding of sleep is necessarily unique and necessarily different from that of everyone else's. No two people could possibly understand something as complex and poorly understood as sleep the same as someone else. So my background with sleep, I guess we would have to go all the way back to my childhood, when I very frequently had something called night terrors. So in order to explore that a little bit more, let's turn to our first fun with definitions. Night terror, also known as sleep terror, is a sleep disorder causing feelings of terror or dread, and typically occurs during the first hours of stage 3 to 4 non-rapid eye movement sleep. Sleep terrors begin in children between the ages of 3 and 12 and usually stop during adolescence. In adults, they most commonly occur between the ages of 20 and 30, though the frequency and severity vary between individuals. The episodes can occur in intervals of days or weeks, but can occur over consecutive nights or multiple times in one night. This has created a situation in which any type of nocturnal attack or nightmare may be confused with and reported as a night terror. Night terrors tend to happen during periods of arousal from delta sleep, also known as slow wave sleep. Delta sleep occurs most often during the first half of a sleep cycle, which indicates that people with more delta sleep activity are more prone to night terrors. However, they can also occur during daytime naps. Night terrors can often be mistaken for confusional arousal. While nightmares, bad dreams that cause feelings of horror or fear, are relatively common during childhood, night terrors occur less frequently. Sleep terror episodes are estimated to occur in 1 to 6% of children and in less than 1% of adults. Night terrors have been known since ancient times, although it was impossible to differentiate them from nightmares until rapid eye movement was discovered. So even then, even with something like rapid eye movement, there still needs to be a value judgment made in terms of distinguishing between something like night terrors and nightmares. There's still a line that needs to be drawn between those two things, and in some cases lines like that are arbitrary, tied to seemingly arbitrary things like rapid eye movement. But again, I'm not a neurologist, or I don't study sleep or anything like that, so what do I know? So as a child, I had a wonderful upbringing, unremarkable in the best sense of the term, in that I had very kind, loving parents. I grew up with 4 siblings, and though we all squabbled from time to time, we had a rather unremarkable, again in the best sense of the term, childhood, each of us. And so my experiences with night terrors, though that was something that obviously you don't want a child to have to go through, it was something that I dealt with, and it wasn't anything too out of the ordinary. So moving forward to 2015, which is around the time when I really started to take this channel seriously. And the reason for that was that if you go back, and I don't know that I mentioned this at all in the playthrough itself, but Dark Souls 2 Let's Talk Lore was something I had wanted to do for a while, but that I didn't really have the time to do, and I wasn't sure whether anyone would care or even watch it at all. But then I went through a breakup that was really, really hard on me, and one of the things that I decided to do was to start working on YouTube things as a way of getting my mind off of everything, off of the breakup more specifically, because even though I had a lot of work to do, I was so torn up and so distraught by the breakup that I just couldn't do anything else. It was the one thing that I was able to do where, it felt like I was doing it for me. Whereas because that relationship that had just ended started right around the time I started my doctoral studies, even though I conceived of my doctoral studies as being for me and a way for me to learn about the world, I also conceived of it as a way to eventually provide for myself and my partner and whatever family we might have had. Because for the first time in my life, I had many relationships before that one, but this was the first one where I was actually looking to the future and, heartened by the possibility that myself and my partner might have children one day. But then at a certain point, she had to move away for school. And when I started working on Dark Souls 2 Let's Talk Lore, that was shortly after that breakup. And then as I reached the end point of that series, something happened. I just decided that I couldn't do it anymore. And I emailed my partner and asked her if I could come to visit her where she was studying. And she said yes. So even though Bloodborne was something like a week away from release, and I had been looking forward to it for months and months and months, and I was planning on day one uploading, the first episode of my blind playthrough, none of that mattered because she wanted me there and I wanted to be nowhere else in the world but with her. So I flew to BC where she was studying. So this most recent trip was actually my second time in BC and not my first. because I had gone there in early 2015 to visit her. I stayed there for 2 weeks and it went really well. I still consider those 2 weeks to be some of the best of my life because I was just so happy. But shortly after she returned for the summer break, things sort of went back to where they were. And, we had many problems. I'm not going to go into it, but eventually she decided that she no longer could be with me. And she didn't think that she could be happy being with me for the rest of our lives in the same way that I did. So we broke up. And that was a very, very traumatic thing for me. And this is right around the time when I started working on Bloodborne Let's Talk lore. So the second time we broke up was when I started working on another series. Because I was just, again, so distraught. And the second time was no easier. In fact, I think it was harder than it was the first time, where I was so depressed I couldn't really do anything. But the one thing that I was able to do was I was able to make YouTube videos, which you all seem to enjoy, which made me feel good, so I kept making more YouTube videos. And to some degree, that's continued to this day. That's, a big part of the reason why I still do this series, why I still spend so much time making these videos, because I enjoy interacting with all of you and it makes me feel good about myself, which since the breakup, that's been something that has been difficult for me. And so, just to be clear, I don't blame my ex for any of this. It's not her fault. We had problems, and I would never want to be with someone who isn't happy to be with me. But I'll get into the real reason for my trauma. Like, obviously it has to do with her, but it has to do with other things as well. But first, let's do another fun with definitions with an unfun concept. So that of trauma. So trauma being a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, a personal trauma like the death of a child, emotional shock following a stressful event, or a physical injury, which may be associated with physical shock and sometimes leads to long-term neurosis. And so I think it's important to distinguish between trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, because those two things are often conflated, and it kind of annoys me as someone who actually suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, the way it's kind of joked about as often as it is, but that's, another story entirely. So, per Wikipedia, post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental disorder that can develop after a person is exposed to a traumatic event, such as sexual assault, warfare, traffic collisions, or other threats on a person's life. Symptoms may include disturbing thoughts, feelings, or dreams related to the events, mental or physical distress to trauma-related cues, attempts to avoid trauma-related cues, alterations in how a person thinks and feels, and an increase in the fight or flight response. These symptoms last for more than a month after the event. Young children are less likely to show distress, but may instead express their memories through play. A person with PTSD is at a high risk for suicide and intentional self-harm. Most people who have experienced a traumatic event will not develop PTSD. People who experience interpersonal trauma, for example rape or child abuse, are more likely to develop PTSD as compared to people who experience non-assault based trauma such as accidents and natural disasters. About half of people develop PTSD following rape. Children are less likely than adults to develop PTSD after trauma, especially if they are under 10 years of age. Diagnosis is based on the presence of specific symptoms following a traumatic event. It might seem silly for me to talk about being traumatized and suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder when the apparent subject of that trauma is a breakup. I recognize how absurd that might sound, given, I wasn't raped, I didn't experience a battlefield, I didn't experience warfare or anything like that. It wasn't physical trauma, it was emotional trauma. And though I don't think trauma is a competition, I did think it was important for me to also note that I consider myself incredibly privileged for a number of reasons. And, I'm not making this to complain, but just, again, to help you understand the interplay that takes place between an author, at least this author, and, the things about which he writes. So the reason why the breakup was so incredibly difficult for me, and in many ways continues to be difficult for me, is because I developed, when I was younger, And this wasn't apparent to me until, the last year or so, when I really had to force myself to look deep inside and figure out what was going on, why I couldn't get over this. And the reason is that in my teenage years, I developed a pretty severe fear of abandonment. And again, I'm not going to go into the specifics of it because it's very personal, and this is personal enough as it is, and I don't want this segment to last the entire episode. But something happened with my parents around the time when I turned 13. And it's very cliche to say this phrase, but I was, in fact, forced to grow up very, very quickly because of the whole idea of men being strong and not, allowing themselves to be affected by emotional things and, not expressing their emotions and how they feel. I reacted to these very traumatic familial events by just sort of shoving my pain deep down inside and not dealing with it, not confronting it directly, but instead doing what I thought I needed to do for the benefit of my family, for the survival of my family. And, I did things like I dropped out of high school twice, which I've mentioned before, but I've never really explained the context for that. And I needed to drop out of high school to help support my family financially. Besides, I wasn't doing well in school anyway, just because I was so distracted by everything that was going on. And it just seemed like such a trivial thing when my family was suffering. And so it was as a result of my teenage years when I was forced, again, to grow up really, really quickly and to, take on this stoic persona of this person that I really wasn't. Due in part to, these absurd notions of masculinity that demand that men not express their emotions and that they be stoic and strong just by ignoring things. And that's in part why I'm such a sensitive and emotional person today, is because I guess to some degree it's a counter reaction against those notions that, I've since rejected so firmly. And so it was these events from my teenage years which undoubtedly informed my relationship with my ex-partner, but also which made her decision to end our relationship that much more. It cut me to the core, as close to the core as someone can be cut without, losing themselves entirely. She was at the center of my social world, and then when she left, it just left. She left in her wake a trail of nothingness. I've felt since that breakup empty in various different ways. And I still think about her every single day. I'm dealing with the trauma as best as I can and trying different strategies to get over it and to deal with it. But, I mentioned earlier that this trip, my research trip to BC, wasn't my first trip to BC. It was my second. And so while I was over there, I actually had four nightmares, like 4 separate nights. One of them was a multi-layered nightmare that I couldn't escape. I would wake up, I'd fall back asleep, and I was right back in it. And again, in definitional terms, nightmare can mean many different things. But for me, these nightmares aren't all nightmares in the sense of, scary and traumatic things are happening in your dreams, but they're occasionally good dreams in the sense that, you're remembering good times. Your mind is reminding you of good times, but then you wake up and you realize that it wasn't real. And at least for me, that causes, a sense of loss and dread and heartbreak all over again. So, there are some mornings where I wake up and I just realize, where I am, and that, in some ways I'm alone. And that's really, really depressing, to say the least. And, we think about emotions and our physical embodiment as being separate things, but on days like that, when I have those dreams and I wake up, it affects me physically. I feel weak. I feel the pain physically and not just emotionally. But the reason I'm telling all of you this is that, again, these experiences that I've had with dreams, with trauma, with, trying to deal with these things and not shove them down deep inside, they inform the way that, the story of this playthrough has unfolded. And something that I've often thought about is the bonfire and how, the bonfire is this very, very safe place. But, Dark Souls 3 sort of introduces this idea of player characters sleeping with, and, it was in Dark Souls 1 to a degree with Siegmeyer, but in Dark Souls 3, you actually get this sleep gesture from Siegward. And so it got me thinking about, the time that we don't see between when, an undead sits down at the bonfire and then stands back up to refill their Estus or something. Do they sleep? Do they relax? Do they sit by the bonfire and just sort of reflect on things that have happened? And, in my mind, at least as I've presented in this playthrough, I think they do. And I think that they sleep and, they try to process things that have happened. And there was something I thought very interesting and intriguing about the idea that here's the bonfire, which its symbol throughout all of the Dark Souls games has been this very safe space where nothing can hurt you at the bonfire. In Dark Souls 1, there are areas where you can be kicked out of the bonfire and invaded if you're in human form. But for the most part in the series, when you're sitting at a bonfire, you're safe. Similarly, we think about our beds at home or, wherever we might be sleeping. We think about those as like, how could you get any safer than that if you're sleeping in your bed in your home? And yet, when you fall asleep, your unconscious mind takes over. So it's very sort of paradoxical in that, there's almost nowhere safer to many people than their own bed, and sleeping in their own bed. There's a sense of familiarity and comfort there that you don't get anywhere else. And yet when you fall asleep, you as a person are still sort of in control, but it's not you consciously in control. It's your mind just sort of doing things on its own, processing things that your mind has been thinking about throughout the day. Again, I'm not a neuroscientist or a psychologist or anything like that, so this is just me speculating and theorizing and talking. But it creates a very odd sense of vulnerability, especially for someone like me, and I'm sure many of you out there who have had issues with nightmares and trauma and, don't necessarily think of sleep always as being this very safe thing. Since I've been home, I've not had any nightmares or bad dreams or anything like that. But again, when I was in BC, because I was walking in many of the same places that I had been with my ex-partner back in 2015, it triggered within me all of these thoughts and feelings and emotions that even though I was so focused on the task of doing, whatever task I was doing for my research at that time, when I went back to the places where I was staying and I fell asleep, in every single one of the places I was staying, I stayed in 4 separate places when I was there. I had a nightmare in all 4 places. And no more, no less. And I don't know what that means or if it means anything, but yeah. Again, sleep is a very odd thing in that you're simultaneously in control, but you're not. You're simultaneously safe, but you're vulnerable. So briefly, before I actually get around to explaining what all of this has to do with the playthrough itself, I just wanted to say that though I understand the inclination and that any such comments would likely be made with the very best of intentions, I wanted to be clear that none of this should be interpreted as an invitation for viewers to diagnose me with conditions or to psychologize about me based on what I've just shared. If you're concerned about me, just know that I am not dealing with this on my own, that I've enlisted the help of a professional. And that while I recognize that I still have a ways to go, I'm doing much, much better now than I have been in a very long time. And I'll be okay. And that's thanks in no small part to all of you out there who so kindly indulge me when I want to ramble on about things that most people simply don't find interesting. So thank you, everyone. Your support, it really does mean the world to me, truly. So finally, in bringing all of this to bear on the playthrough itself, whereas I described myself a few minutes ago as having felt a sense of emptiness in the aftermath of my breakup, for Aegon of Astora, it's not just that he feels empty right now, but that he is literally being emptied out. He is, in a word, hollow. And just as I recognized that I couldn't overcome the trauma that I've experienced on my own without help, so too does Aegon realize that he needs the help of the Firekeeper. In a similar vein, it must also be said that just as one does not overcome trauma overnight, it's unlikely that Aegon's current troubles will be resolved entirely by having his Dark Sigil healed, or passed off to the Firekeeper, depending on how you look at it. At the same time, Aegon can no longer stand the fact that this Dark Sigil, a symbol of Yoel and Uria's manipulation, is permanently affixed to his body, his soul. So even though he doesn't imagine that ridding himself of the Dark Sigil is the cure to all that ails him, he nevertheless sees this as the beginning of a healing journey of sorts. Because after all, Aegon understands and very much relates to Henri's fear of abandonment. And he doesn't want Henri to think that he too has abandoned her, but he's also currently in no shape whatsoever to assist his friend. Okay, so just for the sake of posterity, a black gaping hole in the flesh that resembles the brand of an undead. The darkness of humanity seeps from this bottomless, pitch-black hole, the gap filled by the accumulation of the curse. This Dark Sigil will never heal, but there is a tale told of a Firekeeper who returned from the abyss and brought great comfort to a bearer of the curse. So the brand of an undead to which it's referring is, of course, the Dark Sign. The description for which reads, "The Dark Sign is the sign of an accursed undead. The Dark Sign returns its bearer to the last bonfire rested at, or the bonfire at Firelink Shrine, but at the cost of all souls held. Carriers of the Dark Sign are reborn after death and eventually lose their minds, turning hollow. And so it is that they are driven from their homelands."
Welcome home, Ashen One. Speak thine heart's desire.
I'm not sure if you want me to do that, because you're about to take something on that I don't know that you actually signed up for. Because you didn't seem to know it was a possibility until you were given the soul, but here we go anyway. And there's no dialogue or anything, interestingly enough. It just sort of happens. She just knows. Well, you give her a ton of souls, so that's another thing that we should probably talk about. 881,409 souls. So that's a lot of souls. A shout out to the Memitim for hooking us up. Otherwise, we likely wouldn't be able to explore this aspect of the game in this playthrough. So yeah, almost 1 million souls based on our level. I can't remember the exact specific formula for how this number is determined. I think it's something like the cost of what the last 5 levels in terms of souls, what the last 5 levels cost you, or something like that. But yeah, here goes nothing. Dark Sigil has been healed. So even though it says in the item description that the Dark Sigil can never heal, it's interesting that they still use the language of being healed. She looks alright.
Ashen One, to be Ashen.
Nothing changes in terms of her dialogue.
Farewell, Ashen One. May the flames guide thee.
Thank you, friend. Don't think I don't understand or appreciate the sacrifice you just made for the benefit of Aegon, because he looks a heck of a lot better. And yeah, thankfully she doesn't look any worse for wear, but yeah. She now, somewhere on her person, either has 5 dark sigils or dark holes, or 1 really large one that's, I guess, 5 times the size of a single dark sigil or dark hole. So the required number of souls, 171,000. So I'll have to look up the exact formula because, you know, 5 times less than that would be the number of souls, or the sum of the number of souls we needed for our previous 5 level ups. So in terms of gameplay mechanics, that makes sense in that you got those 5 levels for free, you know, seemingly for free, at least at first. But the actual cost of those levels was the Dark Sigil, having a single dark hole each time placed on your person, and or the existing dark hole opening up to twice the size, 3 times the size, so on and so forth. So there was a cost, but you didn't pay it in souls. You paid it in flesh, really, when you think about it. So then when the Firekeeper is given access, and I'm mostly just thinking out loud here, so I apologize if any of you out there actually understand how this works, because I'm still trying to get straight in my head. So when she has access to a Firekeeper soul that is tainted by the dark sigils of a previous Ashen one, then she gains the ability to be able to take our dark sigils onto her own soul, but only at the cost of whatever that formula is. 0.65 times 5, that's, oh, okay, maybe the math does add up. Ish. So 171,000 times 5 is 855,000. So maybe that's exactly what it is, because each level costs a little bit more than the previous one, and, you know, we're already at an absurdly high level. So we definitely paid, or I guess the Memetim paid, for the fact that we waited so long to do this particular episode and, you know, discuss these mechanics. So, you know, in gameplay terms that makes sense, but in terms of looking at gameplay and story and how they meld together, you could look at the cost of the souls as the stronger your Ashen one gets, the more pronounced the dark holes or dark sigils are on your person, the worse your condition in terms of hollowing out. And again, I think that makes intuitive sense, because if the whole idea behind us being hollowed out is so that we can carry, we can take the first flame into ourselves at the behest of Yuri of Londor and her crew, I guess, the Londor crew. The higher your level, the more souls it costs, because again, intuitively, it makes you a better vessel for the first flame. Insofar as I'm correct in assuming that the higher soul cost has something to do with the fact that, you know, your condition has worsened, but there seems to be an inverse relationship between the extent of your condition and your suitability as a vessel for usurping the first flame. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. The first time I came across this mechanic, one thing that it brought to mind for me was, you know, as far back as Dark Souls 1, all of these different merchants saying that they want souls, and that souls is what keeps them from going hollow. And so I thought maybe what we were seeing here was a more direct sort of exploration of that idea, or you know, a more direct illustration or demonstration of that idea. But what I think is more likely is that, and you know, I'm as always open to be corrected on this, or you know, to hear alternative ideas or thoughts on it. What I think is actually happening with the merchants is that, you know, much like Andre, he has a purpose. You know, you don't get a body like that without being hard at work like all the time. And you know, like the way they designed his workshop, it was the same in Dark Souls 1 as well. Like he's got stuff all over the place. And even though he's only ever working on the same weapon, and I think in Dark Souls 1 it's an S-Stock. Isn't it an S-Stock here as well? It might be a longsword or something in Dark Souls 1, but whatever the case. Even though he's always working on the same weapon, the environmental design of his workshop is such that, you know, they create the impression that he's got lots to do. He has lots of customers, lots of smithing to do, lots of people to charm, and yeah, so, you know, he has a purpose. So even though, you know, physically he doesn't look like he's in, like, you know, he's ripped and everything, but he does have the telltale signs of hollowing in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, in that, you know, he has this sort of webbed look. Maybe webbed isn't the right way of putting it. Earlier when we did the recap, I talked about how it was episode 2, I think, where, and I showed a brief clip of the comparison we did of Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 3 in terms of the hollowing, and this looks a lot like the condition of the skin that hollows suffer from, I guess, or that hollows have in general in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 2 is a little bit different, but I think that's just down to art design. And so, you know, seemingly, even though, you know, he was once supposed to be a son of Gwyn and a god, seemingly he's human, he's undead, and he's been alive all this time because he's got so much to do. So, again, with the, you know, give me souls, I need souls, otherwise I'll go hollow, which is more or less what the female undead merchant says to you in Undead Burg. I don't think that we're meant to take that as evidence that the souls literally keep them from going hollow, but that, you know, the souls are sort of a byproduct of the fact that the undead merchant in Dark Souls 1, she's going out, she's finding moss, she's bringing them back to her little cage thing, and then she's selling it. And, you know, she always seems happy to see you when you go to see her at the end of the aqueduct, where I don't know where she would get any other business other than the chosen undeads in Dark Souls 1. But yeah, that keeps her busy, it keeps her happy, it keeps her sane. And the same seems to be true of Andre. So contrary to what I first imagined, in terms of the implications of the soul cost to removing the Dark Sigil, or to healing the Dark Sigil, or to passing it off to the Firekeeper, it does seem as though that has more to do with just oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Did she use the souls to replace the innards that we lost? Everything that leaked out of us? Because that would make sense. But again, tell me if you think I'm crazy, because that literally just came to me in trying to, you know, figure out, like, what the heck are the souls for? And it could be just as simple as the higher level you are, the more hollow, the worse your condition, so therefore the more stuff that needs to be put back into your body. And so, you know, it makes sense that you would have to use your own souls that you've acquired, to refill your body, because she's not out gathering souls. So unless she had something else that she used to make us unhollow, then that seems to be the likeliest explanation. But as always, I am very interested in hearing what each of you think. So where are we going now? We have some cinders of a lord to deliver. This is Yorm the Giant of the Profane Capital, and the Watchers of the Abyss. So just a review. Cinders of a lord left by the Abyss Watchers. If the lords will not return to their thrones themselves, let them return as cinders. The Watchers of the Abyss swore upon their shared wolf's blood, which also served as their mandate as lords. Rip Abyss Watchers. And you can even see on their helms, there's some like black, and in the skull of this one to the left here, there's some black abyssal gooey stuff. As well as in the actually all three of the skulls have black gooey stuff on them, as well as all three of the hats, so never mind. So even though we're at about the halfway point of this playthrough, we only have returned, so 2 of 5, so 40%. So that, even though we didn't return one of them because Ludleth is just here.
You oft the Lords of Cinder, the Undead Legion. So that's how they're delivered to their thrones. I pity the sorry souls. Is that really Lordship's last reward? I failed to thank you for helping them find their final resting place.
Thank you kindly. Farron Ring, a ring given to Undead Legion of Farron, reduces skill FP consumption. The Abyss Watchers, for their hunting, required a sword technique that went beyond any existing art. Wolf's Blood provided just that, and this ring further extends the effect.
I pity the sorry souls. Is that really Lordship's last reward?
Yeah, I guess it is. It's a pretty screwed up place, this Firelink Shrine.
Aha, thou'rt returned, and a fine day it is. So, happened upon any twisted souls? Ah, most illustrious Lord Seeker, or should I say, Lord Slayer? Fine kindling for the thrones, is it not? Each soul truly worthy of lordship. And all slain by thy hand, to bind them to their thrones, even in death. Oh, I have no qualms, for as we are to our thrones, thou art to thy duty. In fact, methinks thou'st helped these poor lords along their rightful path.
Really? You really think that?
Treat the Firekeeper not with discourtesy. She is much like thee, prisoners both, kept to link the fire.
So I know we've gotten that dialogue from him either in the previous episode or the one prior to that, but I thought it was fitting nevertheless as a way of setting up sort of the second half of this playthrough. And we will have another, I don't think I've said this up to this point, but there will be a Firelink Shrine 2 that will take place after the DLC and before we go to the Kiln of the First Flame. So as a way of wrapping up the second half of this series in the same way that we did with this half of it. But yeah, I think Ludleth's words and those of Hawkwood serve as, you know, a very good entry point to what we'll be discussing through much of the second half of the series. And one of those items of discussion will surely be what it means to be a lord, whether or not the lords are the ones who, you know, perhaps the lords are the ones who got the raw deal in all of this. Because, yeah, other than Ludleth, they're all basically inconsolable. Like, you know, you can't talk any of them down. You can't reason with any of them. They're more or less, at least mechanically in the game, they're more or less monsters that will attack on sight anyone that they see. of course, they all have their own specific duties, like the Abyss Watchers are obviously, in their minds, keeping watch over the Abyss and ensuring that no one ventures there. Yorm has his own thing going on, which we'll talk about. Aldrich is maybe the exception to the rule. And, the Twin Princes are incredibly sympathetic characters, to the point where slaying them almost seems, it almost seems in a game that is dominated largely by moral gray areas, slaying the Twin Princes seems almost like a just morally bad thing to do, but it's absolutely mandatory. And, maybe they did that on purpose. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So next on our list is that we're going to go talk to Greirat. But before we do that, I wanted to, ask JSF some more general questions about Firelink Shrine and, its name, its meaning, the institution of linking the fire, and things like that. So here's part 2 of our conversation. What does the name Firelink Shrine mean to you?
Do you want me to go into translation stuff?
Well, I guess no. I just mean in terms of, in the first episode of this series, one of the things that I asserted, and almost immediately after or before I said these things, I was like, damn it, I really should have talked to JSF about this first. Okay. In that I was very confused about the name Firelink Shrine at first, because we were in this building in a place that was clearly not the Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1. Yeah. So that really confused me at first, but then
I think I left a comment about it.
Did you? Maybe I should.
It was so long ago.
That was, I think the series started last summer, so we're a year and 3 months past when it started.
Yeah,
so
I've totally forgotten everything.
So fly for the most part, which is part of the reason why we're doing this recap episode. But I described Firelink Shrine as a shrine, a place that's designed around the venerating of the fire, of the flame, and of linking the fire. So it's a shrine that's dedicated to preserving the link of fire.
Well, the link of fire is it's an awkward phrase when you think linking the fire. Mm-hmm. I think the idea is it's linking as in it's passed down from person to it's being passed down from Gwyn to Chosen Undead in Dark Souls 1 through to however many people, through to Vendrick, through to however many more people, then through to the 4/5, depending on how you interpret it, Lords of Cinder in Dark Souls 3. So it's it's linking a chain. It's almost like a family tree of people who've taken the fire into themselves. The thing about it, initially it was I guess there could be more than one Firelink Shrine but at the same time, everything that happens there is incredibly significant, which makes it seem okay, there probably is only one Firelink Shrine.
Which appears to be in a different dimension then.
Well, it could be either because it's so far in the future, it could either be that they've just rebuilt the original Firelink Shrine over and over again, or it could be that there's just one Firelink Shrine at a time. So the original Firelink Shrine's been lost for however many thousand years, and then when they came around to the recent past of Lothric, they just built another one.
Oh, see,
because it's special. Yeah, it's specially built for 5 lords, and it's got their names engraved on the backs of the thrones. So presumably, it was built for them to some degree.
Yeah, because that was one I was having a little hard time squaring the apparent existence of different satellite firelinks, which would make sense if there were some slight differences between them, because then you could easily say, okay, this was the firelink of a previous cycle.
Yeah,
but
we know that the one we're at in 3 is the firelink of many previous cycles because of all the dead bodies. But depending on how frequently this linking of the fire happens, it could have been here for 1,000 years, but still been newer, constructed when Lothric was constructed.
Mm-hmm. Or it could be something similar to the Hunter's Dream being a snapshot in time of sorts of the abandoned, what's it called? The abandoned church workshop?
Abandoned old workshop.
Abandoned old workshop.
No, note that I can instantly recall the names of things in Bloodborne, which came out in 2015.
Yeah, I know.
So I need to look up game FAQs to find bits of Dark Souls 3.
Go figure.
Yeah, they say in, I forget which item description it is, but like they talk about Lothric is a land that is famous in history for being a site of linking the fire. Mm-hmm. So presumably, like, maybe that Firelink Shrine was constructed when Lothric Castle was constructed. And, like, so it's been there ever since Lothric Castle's been there, but there was some other Firelink Shrine beforehand that it replaced.
So in terms of the parallels to Shintoism?
I don't know if Firelink Shrine's really a Shinto shrine at all.
Okay.
Like the idea of... This is a thing in Dark Souls that I've talked about before, and I've talked about it in reference to Bloodborne as well. In Japan, there is it's not technically a religion per se. It's like the indigenous beliefs of the indigenous kind of spiritual system that is itself compatible with other religions is called Shinto, and it's what's called an animist religion, which is that rather than having there's the physical world and then above that you have deities and spirits and things, it's everything in the physical world kind of has its own spirit. Mm-hmm. And the idea of a kami is it's a spirit or a god or something that inhabits something in the real. Like a person could be a kami if there was a very significant historical figure, but in shrines and things around Japan, you have you have a shrine that there's a tree next to it. And this tree is a kami, this mountain is a kami, this stream is a kami.
An example that you raised in the context of the deep, and you were very careful to point out that, it's not like a one-to-one, but it's a framework for understanding.
Yeah.
Was Amano Iwato?
Amano Iwato. Amano Iwato is a cave it's a cave that's supposed to be a cave that's mentioned in an old in a myth about the sun god hiding. It's a myth about an eclipse where a sun goddess hides herself in this cave, and she has to be that's an eclipse, and then they kind of coax her out again and the eclipse finishes. And it's just a cave. It's a sacred cave, and it's this is the cave from the myth, and you can't there's a temple near the cave, but you can't go in the cave because it's too sacred. So it's there's a temple here, it just worships this cave, and this area is being very sacred, but you can't go into the cave itself. You just have to stand on this platform and look at you can't photograph the cave or anything like that. It's so that cave itself is the thing that's being worshipped, because the cave is seen as sacred, and because it's seen as sacred, it's seen as these kami are attracted to the cave, basically.
And but Firelink you wouldn't necessarily, because there was the kami, and then what was the other aspect of that? There was the person.
Well, the thing in there's shrine mate Shinto shrines have shrine maidens.
Oh, shrine maidens. Yeah, okay, that's
shrine maidens.
Yeah.
If people watching this if they're familiar with kind of manga and anime tropes, you probably know what a shrine maiden looks like. It's when you see kind of young women in these white kind of robes around shrines, and they will have these sort of wands and things that they wave to purify and stuff. So the maiden in black and the firekeepers are kind of presented as shrine maiden-ish. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I don't want to be for the sake of brevity, they're kind of like a nun.
Okay.
But not.
Yeah. But it's more obviously more complicated.
A priest. Yeah, a priest. This is a problem we run into all the time with these things, where you can say, okay, she's a shrine maiden, that's kind of like a priestess, but then we have our own idea of what a priestess is that's then mapped back onto that, which is not entirely accurate. It's like we were talking about kami, because a common way to translate kami would be god,
which obviously is not quite directly.
Yeah, and if you say you can translate it as spirit, but again, spirit is not. People have their own ideas of what is. Well, does that mean it's a ghost? Does that mean that you can banish it and things like that? And
yeah, or an omniscient, omnipotent god, in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's a completely different thing.
It's led to so much confusion because that is very clearly how the Souls world is kind of set up. It's set up in that kind of Japanese way, but because it uses the kind of superficial trappings of European religion that we're used to, it creates this weird idea of well, is Miyazaki saying, is this supposed to actually be organized religion? And therefore, when you have something like The Deep, is that Miyazaki talking about the corruption of the church and things like that? And I mean, it's a massive issue in Bloodborne because that uses so much Catholic iconography.
Well, I really appreciate your trepidation when it comes to stuff like that, because one thing that really bugged me in Bloodborne was when, someone released a video that described the bloodletting beast as the host of the beast blood. And, without really thinking about it too much, someone, made this post talking about how, bloodletting, they were using bloodletting to, extract the blood from this person so they could give it to everyone. And, I got into a thing with this person saying, well, no, I know it might be called that in Japanese, but the term they use for it in English is a very highly specific historical term. And, you can't just take something like bloodletting and completely change its meaning just because you interpreted the Japanese text as saying this. When the DLC came out, we found out that yes, indeed, they seem to be using a very historically bloodletting in a very historically specific sense, even with maybe not a realistic sense, but in the sense that the bloodletter and weapons like that were meant to
you are trying to let blood
and corrupted blood or blood that was throwing I don't remember the specifics of it, but throwing the humors out of whack, essentially.
Yeah, and like one of the reasons that when I do stuff I focus on visual details and design and things is that it's harder to you can argue all day about the specifics of bloodletting, or you can look at the fact that there are church guys with whips and there are beasts in Bloodborne that have these huge gashes all over their backs that are all swollen up, which look like, when people flagellated and let blood. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's obviously present in this game.
Yeah.
But that's probably a story for another day. So before we get started, we had a comment from Sound Phenomenon who writes, I would be happy to let you use any of my Soulsborne music free of charge for your series. So yeah, I owe a shout out and an apology to Sound Phenomenon, whose music you're listening to right now, and which is from an album called Ashen, which contains ambient music for each area in the game and some of the sub-areas within a given area. And it's quite a beautiful album. And my apology to Sound Phenomenon is the fact that I think this is the third or fourth time that that he or she has offered to allow me to use their music in my videos. So yeah, my apologies that it's taken me so long to get around to checking it out and seeing whether or not it would work. So yeah, so I finally got around to listening to this album, and the biggest problem for me with stuff like that is just trying to figure out where it fits. So that's why it took me so long to respond to this very kind offer. So my sincerest apologies, Sound Phenomenon, but I would encourage you all to go check out the album for yourselves. It's on YouTube. I'll leave a link to Sound Phenomenon's YouTube channel as well as his or her Bandcamp page in the video description below, and I would highly encourage you to check it out. So with all that said, Greirat, hi friend. The last we spoke to him, we had sent him to pillage in Irithyll of the Boreal Valley.
Oh, then we're both safe and sound. Thank the gods for that. I don't like getting things so close. I might have died if it wasn't for that peculiar onion knight. But in the end, it all paid off. Take a good look. They're sure to be of some use.
So I mentioned once or twice in this episode that there are things that I've forgotten about Dark Souls 3 just because this playthrough has taken so long. And the majority of my playtime when playing Dark Souls 3 these days is concentrated in the areas that we're still making videos for. So I've not played the late game of Dark Souls 3 in quite some time. But Dezo Penguin writes, regarding patches, don't forget that if you trigger his appearance in-game, but don't buy Sigvard's armor from him, you can trigger patches to go to Irithyll and save Greirat. He'll actually perform acts of heroism given the ability to suit up, maybe foreshadowing Lap. So yeah, that is really, really cool, and a nice little touch that I forgot to mention in the previous episode, so I thank you, Deso Penguin, for bringing this up. Another aspect of that I find rather interesting is that I'm not sure if it's when you aggro Greirat that patches aggros, or if you need to kill one of them in order to aggro the other one, but their aggro is linked in a way that, again, suggests that somewhere deep inside of Patches, he's not all evil. And that, as we'll see later on with Lap, with Amnesiac Lap, there is some good in him. It's just he gets these urges, running a business and all. Oh, man. So had we purchased the armor from Patches and not given it to Sigvard, we would have found poor Greirat in the Irithyll sewers. That is where I found his ashes, unfortunately, in my blind playthrough. He was able, however, to survive because of Sigvard, with whom we shared a toast as he was sitting by a fireplace a few steps away from where you would have otherwise found Greirat's ashes. So yeah, he saved Greirat and then just went and sat by the fire. Another interesting thing to note about that, sort of as an aside, is that Sigvard never comes to Firelink. He never comes to Firelink, but he describes himself as an unkindled. Maybe he's doing like a no death, no bonfire run or something. He really is trying to get to the profane capital quickly, other than, needing to stop and sleep and for toasts and things like that. But yeah, he's one of the unkindled that we find in the world who doesn't go back to Firelink at all, or doesn't pass through our Firelink. But yeah. So Greirat has a number of new things, and I actually wrote down this time the things that we need to talk about, because a lot of these items are new to his inventory, but we've discussed them already because you find them elsewhere in the game. So the first thing is the Hidden Blessing. Hidden Blessing, holy water blessed by the Queen of Lothric, fully restores FP. There is a grave in Lothric that sees no visitors, a dark place where rootless warriors rest. The Queen of Lothric alone cared to wish the poor souls good fortune. And so we have already read the Divine Blessing, but just for posterity's sake, holy water blessed by the Queen of Lothric fully restores HP and cures ailments. The Queen of Lothric, married to the former King Osiros, was initially revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. After giving birth to Ocelot, her youngest, she quietly disappeared. So we're going to be talking at great length about the many things that are implied by both item descriptions as well as the identity of Queen Lothric, which we've already sort of discussed. I believe we discussed that in episode 10 with JSF and Cassidiv. And all three of us agreed that, at least for us, it's apparent, or at least it was back then, that the Queen of Lothric is, in fact, Guinevere, Princess of Sunlight. So then we have a ton of weapons, but one that we've not yet read the description for is the Scholar's Candlestick. A candlestick covered in ivory scales, once used by the scholars of the Great Archives. This served as their guiding light, as well as a tool of self-restraint. Even today, wielders of this weapon benefit from the resulting sorcery strengthening properties. Skill, Guiding Light. A candle provides a temporary source of light which reveals additional guidance. So the same as the guidance spell. So presumably you can use this candle to summon people without being embered, which is interesting. And then we got what I believe is all of the Lothric weapons. But the only one I believe that we've not yet seen is the Lothric Knight Greatsword. Ultra Greatsword of the Venerable Knights of Lothric, imbued with the strength of lightning, the trademark of dragon hunting. Very few have demonstrated the extreme strength and dexterity required for this weapon, even in the long history of the Lothric Knights. So it's time for our next fun with definitions. With venerable, which means accorded a great deal of respect, especially because of age, wisdom, or character. A venerable statesman, so someone who's respected, venerated, revered, honored, so on and so forth. So I'm reasonably certain that it's the first one we're looking for. Someone who commands a great deal of respect, especially because of their age, their wisdom, or their character. So the Knights of Lothric are venerable. They command respect because presumably they are very chivalrous and upstanding knights who have honor and all that good stuff. And we also have the Lothric Knight Longspear, which reads, Longspear wielded by the proud Lothric Knights, designed for long-range thrusting. Lothric Spear Knights are known for their steadfastness, and this spear boosts the poise of its wielder. Skill, charge, hold spear at waist and charge at foe. Use strong attack while charging to extend the length of the charge. And another fun with definitions here, this time for steadfast, which is being resolutely or dutifully firm and unwavering. So the Lothric Spear Knights are known for being resolute and dutifully firm and unwavering. So they don't give up, they don't flee, they don't go back on their word, they have a duty to do and they do it. To the best of their ability, or presumably they die and maybe behead themselves, as we saw early on in the series, but that's something that we're definitely going to explore in greater depth when we go to the High Wall of Lothric. Great Shield of the renowned Lothric Knights, decorated with a holy symbol. The knights who formed the High Priestess's guard carried great shields such as these, which were granted high magic absorption through her blessing. So, hinting once more that, there's a little bit more to High Priestess Emma. That, High Priestess isn't just a title. She's a very important person within the Lothric regime. So that's very interesting. And yes, again, something that we'll be exploring in greater depth in the second half of this series. Next we have the Moonlight Arrow. Magical arrows said to have been used by the Dark Moon Knights. Imbued with a silver light, these arrows inflict magic damage. It is said that long ago, the god of the Dark Moon, Gwyndolin, wielded these arrows with a matching golden bow. So the current state of the Dark Moon blades, the fate of Gwyndolin, and the apparent presence based on the fact that Greirat looted these Lothric Knight items from Irithyll, the apparent presence of Lothric forces in Irithyll says a lot of stuff about what is happening there, some of which we explored in the previous episode, and some of which we'll explore in greater depth when we return for Anor Londo. Dragonslayer Great Arrow, large spear-like arrows created by the giant blacksmith of the gods, can only be used with great bows. These large arrows were said to have been used by dragon hunters during the Age of the Gods, easily pierces human flesh. And the Dragonslayer Lightning Arrow, which is also a great arrow, and the description is mostly identical except for this last line, which reads, Lightning has been a weapon of Dragonslayers ever since the time of Gwyn, the First Lord. And we get a little bit of chronological clarity here with the lightning bolts, which reads, bolts imbued with lightning created by the giant blacksmith of the gods. However, the gods never used crossbows. These bolts are likely artifacts of the dragonless era when the pact between gods and humans was upheld. So obviously the bolts came later than the Dragonslayer lightning arrows.
You can keep the ring as, well, a little trinket of thanks, I suppose.
I would give it back to you if I could. Should we just drop it for him? I don't know that we're ever going to use it. Would it just disappear, I wonder?
Goodbye. And stay safe. Oh, this place is a bore. What good is thievery if you've nowhere to go?
Dude, you almost just died. You would have died if Siegfried wasn't there for you. And he's not always going to be there. So, get used to it. Or, like, I don't know, find something fun to do that doesn't involve stealing. Okay, we're going to leave that there for him. I imagine it'll disappear when we rezone, but I feel bad carrying it around when, you know, he's still obviously dealing with that, dealing with the grief associated with that loss of Loretta, who I still don't know who that is, but ultimately it really doesn't matter because, you know, they were close, and that's really all that matters. I should have asked JSF about this, but I'm not sure that there's really anything to talk about. Because, you know, it's really just a spot to get seeds. And really not much else, because the thread with the giants from Dark Souls 2 is more or less not... Like, there are some, I guess, traces of it in this game, but for the most part, it's just kind of forgotten. So it's curious that they would bring this back just for the seeds instead of like making it a different item or something. I don't know. But I was disappointed because when I first came to Firelink Shrine, I saw this and I thought, whoa. Like they're really tying, because that was one part of Dark Souls 2 I actually really enjoyed, of the story, of the struggles of the giants and the revelation with Solaire of the First Sin that they had been enslaved and turned into the golems. I thought that was heartbreaking in all the best possible ways, that and you know, the way that FromSoft is so good at just making you feel like crap. But yeah.
You me pickled pea. Me bumperum.
You are so cute until you start saying that like every 3 seconds. Which is going to happen a lot here, I imagine. So I apologize if I get crabby in this segment, but this is something that JSF and I talked about.
You me pickled pea. Me bumperum.
Stop it. I'm gonna walk over here while we do the preamble. So yeah, so the crow, the trading crows. The guide refers to them as the Nestling of Firelink Shrine, and that is a bird that is too young to leave its nest. Oh crap. Oh crap. Alright, well, I might as well play the conversation that JSF and I had, because we came, or really JSF came up with a really good idea that might explain what the guide refers to as the Nestling of Firelink Shrine. It's called the Nestling of Firelink Shrine, and then on the same page it says, it's a parenthetical remark, rumored to be Snugly the Crow. And I don't know what that means, because whose rumors? Like, why can't the guide writers just, you know, be clear about what they mean by that? Like, are they speaking in extra textual terms? Or did someone at FromSoft tell them, well, it's rumored that it's Snugly the Crow? So I don't know. So I'm just going to call them either the Trading Crows, or the Firelink Shrine Nestling, or Pickle Pea Pumperum. Because I don't know where the name Snugly comes from, other than just that weird line. But yeah. This definition would seem to run counter to that of the answer that I was very satisfied with that JSF provided at the end of our third and final conversation. So let's ask JSF about the crow. I think that's it. I guess my last question would be whether or not you have any thoughts on what the guide calls the Nestling of Firelink Shrine.
Pickle pea.
Picklepea Pumperum. It calls it the Nestling of Firelink Shrine, but then it says that it is rumored to be called Snuggly the Crow, and I'm like, so rumored by who? Like, what are you talking about?
Oh god. It goes back to Demon Souls, where you had. She's not named in the game, but I think her official name, according to From, is Sparkly.
And she was in the area with the like flying stingrays, was it? Yeah,
it's a similar setup where you leave stuff outside this like nest, and then when you come back in, it's traded for something else. But weirdly, it's either the game files or something else describes her officially as like a hawk-winged girl. You never see her, but she's described as almost like a harpy, like she's like a half bird, half woman. She's called a hawk-winged girl.
And this is from Demon Souls, right?
That's from Demon, yeah. And like the whole the From obsession with ravens goes all the way back to Armored Core, Ravens and Crows, because in that game your character is called the Raven.
Oh.
You belong to that's like you belong to a group of mercenaries called the Ravens.
Interesting.
So you're all in the game. You're always just called. You choose a name for your character, but you're always called Raven because that's like your identifier. And,
okay,
like
it makes sense. So kind of like Chosen Undead, but much more specifically.
And your home base is called Raven Nest, and like you have like. In that game, when you go to like the menu and things in between levels, there's like a big drawing of a raven in the background, and you can get like raven emblems on your mecha and stuff like that. And it goes all the way into
some of the
like,
Armored Core games, really.
Yeah, and it's a recurring thing throughout those, like constantly. There's like there'd be almost 24 Armored Core games at this point, and they all like really heavily foreground ravens.
Interesting.
Like both as like a visual motif on the characters, and also there'll be like I think it's either 2 or 3. It just starts like the intro is this actual like CGI crow like hopping around a battlefield, sort of pecking stuff, and like if you watch like Armored Core 5 made a big deal out of how like you can kind of make a raven with its wings spread into a V for 5.
Okay,
so that goes all the way back to they've been into ravens.
So
although
it's just
weirdly,
one of their recurring themes.
It's a recurring theme, but like in Demon Souls, for some reason, it's a hawk. So I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, but they all, and then like unless in Demon Souls it's random, they all serve basically the same function, except in Dark Souls 2, where it was much more akin to what do they call those machines?
Like a capsule machine.
Yeah, where like you put in 25 cents or whatever, and then you get something. One of like 5 different things, except in Dark Souls 2 it's nonsense the way it works, but because it's tied to item discovery and stuff like that.
It's not random in Demon Souls.
And so I guess if there's any part of the game in terms of like the item descriptions that you could probably describe as fan service, I would be probably most, and I generally don't like using that term as a dismissive sense, but like when you pick up the Solaire's armor set, like I can't think of any other way of explaining it other than that.
Yeah,
like it's just this thing that they wanted to bring back so that people could cosplay as Solaire while co-oping and stuff. Like
we were talking about Armored Core just then. Like that does a similar thing. There's like, as bizarre as it sounds, there are iconic robot parts that show up, and like but they just recur, and they don't have like an explanation of why. It's just, oh, here it is again.
Yeah.
Here's that helmet you like, it's back, and it just is.
Because they're tied to specific characters, because like, you find the Mirrah set, for instance, in the Undead Settlement, but you only find Lucatiel's mask by trading with the Crow. So it's like almost like a window into the previous games in a way that is better that they did that rather than sort of just having it not make any sense. And just
they
finding
do that with Solaire, but then they also have like Solaire's talisman and sunlight petals just lying around, and it's just soup.
And the what's it called, being transported, like the ultra sunlight somehow.
Oh yeah.
Like unless.
Oh no, but it makes much more sense in 3 than it does in 2.
Yeah, because in 2 it's in.
In 2 it's just in a cave somewhere for no reason.
You wonder why we don't find it in the DLC in the Ring City. We actually go to Earthen Peak, so you'd think that but. I guess they moved it out of Earthen Peak. I don't really know.
I guess there could be more than one altar of sunlight. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I guess you could talk about how, like, birds actually do steal stuff and put it in their nest. There are birds like lyrebirds will do it, where, like, they'll... I don't know how popular lyrebirds are across the world, but, like, they're a bird that's... it's L-Y-R-E, lyre.
Okay.
They steal blue things. They just really like that. So if seriously, they will just grab blue stuff and they'll take it back to their nest and they just hoard it.
That's amazing. Wow. I've never heard of that. Are they only in Australia?
They might be, but they are attracted to blue. I have no idea why. I'm sure there's some evolutionary reason. But if you leave blue stuff out with a lyrebird, it will just grab the blue stuff and fly back to its nest and keep the blue stuff.
Yo, that's amazing.
So you find lyrebird nests and they're full of like combs and like bits of like old, like
little
candy
kids'
bar
toys and stuff.
Yeah, and they're not big enough to. They're not like huge, but you'll find like
hummingbird size kind
stuff.
of.
No, bigger than that.
Okay,
but like you find like the wrappers from things and just anything like bits of like discarded jewelry and things. They just pick them up and put them in their nest. So I think like crow, the way that you trade with the crow might be like a take on the like raptors will do. Because are there many crows and like raptors where you are?
There were a lot of crows. There were a lot of crows in BC. That was one of the things I noticed more than anything when I was on the West Coast was that, wow, there's so many crows here, and I barely see any in Toronto. In Toronto, it's mostly seagulls.
Yeah, there's a ton of raptors, like of crows and magpies around, Australian magpies, which are different to other magpies.
Okay.
Where I live, and like they just take stuff and take it back to their nest all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll just grab stuff and fly off. So I think that's kind of what they might be getting at.
Kind of the idea there.
The crow trade, but like the crows have just been stockpiling all this stuff,
which makes sense. Yeah, that's about as satisfying. Just been collecting junk. That's about as satisfying an explanation as I've ever heard. Because although obviously the crows would have to be pretty big to carry some of these items, because there's some really hefty items there.
There's that massive one in Dark Souls 1.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, so maybe dropping it off, because that one I think is specifically the tiny one, or the one you trade with is specifically named Snuggly and not rumored to be named Snuggly or whatever the guide says. And so that it would make sense that the big crow is like grabbing these things and maybe stealing them from people who are in New Game Plus or whatever, or leaving the asylum, and then just like dropping them there.
And there's that weird thing where like in Dark Souls 2 they want stones. They want like smooth stones.
Silky.
And then in Bloodborne, there's the crows. When you kill them, they sometimes drop the little round pebbles. And I don't know if like is this a thing? Like
they're like petrified eyes. The pebbles.
Yeah, but like I don't know. You might know because you're the science studies guy. But like, don't birds eat rocks sometimes, like deliberately as like a digestion thing? Keeping like rocks in their stomachs to help them crunch stuff up.
I know much more about fish these days than I do Pacific salmon specifically, but no, but that would at least seems to make intuitive sense.
Yeah, I know some animals do that.
But yeah, like I guess that's probably as good an explanation as we could probably come up with in terms of the crows, because I honestly can't conceive of any other reason why they would have like Lucatiel's mask or anything like that. That they're just finding junk. These things, collecting them and just
like I was dropping a whole lot of garbage off today at like the dump here, which is called the Tip in Australia. I was at the Tip. And that is just filled. There was a whole lot of ibises there. Ibises running around through all of the garbage, just like fishing around and taking whatever they are interested in and then flying off with it.
Yeah. I certainly got a much better answer to that question than I expected we would, because I was just like thinking of things to ask that you might be able to like give me good thoughts about, and then that was like the last thing. Like I just wrote it down at the end, like, well, maybe I should ask him about Snuggly, see if he has any thoughts about that. So thank you very much, JSF, for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me on.
And
I'm sorry I didn't have more to say.
Wow, you had some very, very helpful things to say, and we'll see you back in a couple of episodes.
Hopefully, yes. Okay.
All right, have a good one.
Bye.
So, just to clarify, after our conversation, JSF took to Twitter and tweeted, was delighted to introduce Aegon of Astora to lyrebirds and their real-life item trading mechanics. And then we received in reply a tweet from Adam Kranz, who writes, "This looks like the work of a bowerbird, not a lyrebird. Am I missing something?" To which JSF replied in turn, "I just looked it up, and apparently Australia confuses the bowerbird and lyrebird. Like if you Google lyrebird nests, you find that photo." So it's the bowerbird, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which takes blue things and brings it to its nest as a way of attracting a mate, which is interesting and hilarious, but also kind of sad when you consider that the things that they're picking up are trash. And, you know, I wonder about the ecological impact that something like that has, but, you know, I'm not sure what can be done about that. But it is pretty funny, and I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that. But yeah, that was the idea that we had with respect to any plausible explanation you could have that would allow the Firelink Shrine Nestling or Pickle Pea Pumperum to make some measure of sense in terms of, you know, the in-game mechanics and story, instead of it just being, you know, an out-of-game fan service dispenser or fan service trading post or something. But as always, I'm very much open to hearing whether any of you have any ideas, or this is one thing I had no expectation that this was a problem within the context of the playthrough that we would solve. It's a very really trivial question when you think about it, but I figured if we're doing an episode on Firelink Shrine, it would be silly for us not to at least explore that possibility. Yes, I know. Okay. So I have a list of items that we need to trade with them here. And the first is Siegbräu, which I'm wondering if any of my German viewers can confirm or deny this, but this name seems to mean victory beer or victory drink. Just based on my very, very limited understanding of German. And so, you know, he is a very good friend and a very heroic kind of knight who's a little bit silly, just like one of the NPCs from Dark Souls 1. So it's really no surprise when we leave it in the nest and we find that
Pumperum, 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 pumperum.
Armor of the Sun. Chainmail armor and white coat featuring a large rendition of the holy symbol of the sun, the choice attire of a singular knight of sunlight from a previous age. The symbol was painted by the knight himself, but the armor never bore any special power, sacred or otherwise. So it really is just underscoring the things that this armor set told us in Dark Souls 1, that this person never had any special powers, and the armor is rather unremarkable, but Solaire, he's awesome and all that stuff. So for the rest of his set, we need to trade in a lightning urn. Dragon hunting tool used by Lothric knights, explodes upon contact, inflicting lightning damage. The Knights of Lothric have since tamed dragons, but were once hunters of dragons themselves. This explains their special hunting gear and why they worshipped the sun. So lightning urn, homeward bone is the next one. I might as well just read them all before we drop them. Bone fragment reduced to white ash. Return to last bonfire used for resting or to the shrine bonfire. Bonfires are sustained by bones of the undead. In rare cases, their previous owner's strong urge to seek bonfires enchants their bones with a homeward instinct. So I don't know how that really connects to Solaire other than in like a really vague way. That could technically connect to any undead, but yeah. And then the last one is a seed of a giant tree rather. Make enemies react to invaders for only like 5 seconds now. The giant trees were also known as watcher trees, and their seeds unmask invaders. When used effectively, these seeds will help counter dark spirits. So I don't know why that would give you something that belonged to Solaire, but yeah. And yeah, some of the items are classified as Pumperum, the others are classified as Pickle Pea. I can't remember which ones are which, or again, whether there's any significance to it.
Pickle Pea, pickle.
But I would very much welcome any thoughts on the matter. So Iron Helm, large durable iron helm, known as a Hume or a Hiayumi. I want to say Hume because the only place I could find a definition for this word was Merriam-Webster.com, and it doesn't have like a pronunciation guide, or maybe it does, but I didn't copy and paste it. But the definition of Hume is, Hume, whatever, a large helmet chiefly of the 13th century worn over a hood of mail or close-fitting steel cap, and supported by the shoulders rather than the head. So, in other words, Solaire was buff, and he had really broad shoulders. This helm with the red feather is said to have belonged to a Knight of Sunlight in a previous age. The Hume has no particular powers, but is of fine quality, and appears to have been looked after with the greatest of care. Iron bracelets, durable iron bracelets protecting the wearer's wrists, said to be the bracelets of a Knight of Sunlight from a previous age. Has no particular powers, but are of fine quality and evidently well taken care of. And the leggings say the exact same thing. So yeah.
You. Me, Picklebee. Me, Bumperum.
You can't see it, but Aegon just rolled his eyes. Oh man, okay. The next item we need to drop is a vertebra shackle, of which I think we have only one, but that's fine. Lucatiel's mask. Mask attached to a ceremonial hat. A hollow once fought valiantly with this mask, but feared the fading of herself, and implored a comrade to remember her name. Perhaps that is why this gentleman's mask is named after a woman. I don't quite understand that last line, other than, hey, we need a few more words in here. So, let's just restate the previous point. Unless this is designed, unless this is designed for people who didn't play Dark Souls 2, but if they didn't play Dark Souls 2, this mask wouldn't mean anything to them anyway, so I don't know. But there is one word here, our last fun with definitions for today, which is self. As a noun, a person's essential being that distinguishes them from others, especially considered as the object of introspection or reflexive action. And also a person's particular nature or personality, the qualities that make a person individual or unique. So if we had more time, I would probably suggest that we do a fun with definitions for several of the words that are contained within this very definition, because selfhood is a very difficult concept to wrap one's head around. In some ways, one's sense of self, the very term in some cases can be contradictory. Consider, for instance, when I mentioned earlier that as a result of the breakup that I experienced in 2015, I felt a sense of emptiness inside. And that was because, in part, when you're with someone for such a long time that you can't imagine not being with them. And that really, and in some respects, that changes who you are. Because you see yourself not just as an individual who exists in isolation from everyone else, but you see yourself as part of a larger whole. The same goes for non-romantic relationships as well, of course, for friendships and for relationships with your loved ones in general, just people in your family. And I think that's why, with Lucatiel, a huge aspect of her storyline wasn't just that she was losing her sense of self, but also that she had feared that she had lost her brother, the person who, for all of her life, she looked up to, and that, in some way she seemed a little bit envious of, because everything just came so easy to him, and he became a decorated knight before she did. And then it was up to her to fulfill the promise that they made to each other, that if one of them ever went hollow, the other would put them out of their misery. Or at least that's how I interpreted her storyline. So though Lucatiel's quest really was about not only realizing who she had always wanted to be, and she'd always wanted to surpass her brother, but presumably not in the way that she ended up surpassing him. So again, you can probably explain the presence of this mask here by the fact that, you know, at least they didn't put the mask in the Undead settlement with the rest of the Mirrah set, because the traveling Mirrah Knight set can theoretically belong to anyone from Mirrah, whereas Lucatiel's mask was a very specific ceremonial mask that is associated with her, at least in the Dark Souls games, maybe not in the world more generally, but for us, when we see this, we know if we play Dark Souls 2 that that's Lucatiel's mask. So that can kind of be explained. But again, not if, you know, a nestling is too small to carry things to the nest, because then I have no idea how it is that they would have brought these things here. So yeah, we have a few more items to trade here, starting with an alluring skull. A strange head of unknown origin carved from Archtree. It speaks when thrown on the ground. This head says, "Hello. Have another look. Do you see the sense of amicability in its eyes?" So I actually took the advice of this item description for the first time, and I looked, and you can see a face, kind of, and maybe it's just another one of those in the eye of the beholder things, like the ink blot test that we discussed in an earlier episode. But it really does look like there are two eyes and the mouth in the middle, that the mouth is sort of vertically oriented and the eyes are circular. And I don't know if that's always been there, but we're just seeing it now because of the increased fidelity on the item description images. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And you know, all this time the item description was telling me, have another look. And it wasn't until we got here in Let's Talk Lore that I actually took its advice. And I was like, oh my god, there is a face there. And so earlier, I don't know when, but earlier we got the Help Me one. And this one's a little bit less clear, but the item description reads, a strange head of unknown origin carved from an Archtree. It speaks when thrown on the ground. This head says, "Help me. Look again. Can you hear the desperation of its plea?" So it looks like maybe in the top right, like it's like a contorted face that's screaming, sort of like the, you know, that painting The Scream. But this one is a lot less apparent than this one, which really does look like a face going, "Hello!" And feeling amicable in the process. A strange head of unknown origin carved from an Archtree. It speaks when thrown on the ground. This head says, "Very good. Have another look. Does it not appear rather jovial?" Okay, that long pause was me like squinting, even though I'm not far from my TV, and trying to see something in this one, but I don't see anything in this one. If anyone wants to like open up MS Paint or Photoshop or something and highlight the features and show it to me. Oh, okay, I guess I kind of see it. The thing in the middle is like the mouth really, really wide open, and the eyes. Thank you. A strange head of unknown origin carved from an Archtree. It speaks when thrown on the ground. This head says, "Thank you. Have another look. Is this not the face? Is this not a face of gratitude?" Maybe? It kind of looks like a Corvian almost. But again, I could just be seeing it. Seeing things, seeing what I want to see. And I'm sorry. This head says, "I'm sorry, have another look. Isn't it quite the expression of atonement?" I can't tell. This one looks almost like someone sort of curled up in a fetal position, but again, I'm sure I'm just imagining that. In which case,
I'm sorry.
all right. I think that's it. Darkblood Souls writes, Irithyll is made up of words from Tolkien lore, with the IR meaning when and Ithil meaning moon. It loosely means when the moon is out, or nighttime in the Boreal Valley. Darkblood Souls also noted in a separate comment that since we now know about Filianor and her relationship with plants and foliage, that's why budding green blossoms are ethereal. So obviously we'll be talking about Filianor in great detail later on, but yeah. Aaron writes, in regards to the mangrub down there, it's a little weird because only the people who've put in the time are turned into the mangrubs. They've done a lot of murdering to get souls to get to where they can use Rosaria's service enough times to turn. They were also obviously of higher rank because they're down there alone. What confuses me is how they are mangrub there, though. You turn into them after indulging in Rosaria's services too many times, and from how others describe it, it's almost an instantaneous event. So unless Rosaria was down there with the mangrub, why would he be there? They don't stray far from Rosie once they are grubified. It just doesn't make sense, but also it's so bizarre to randomly have a grub down there that it must mean something, right? Oni writes, the Rosaria's mangrub seems to be situated pretty close to the bridge where we gank Creighton with Cirrus, so maybe the grub is a finger Cirrus killed while exploring the entrance to Irithyll. This confuses me even if this isn't the case because mangrubs are not very mobile and she is very far from home. Must have been quite the journey. Alternatively, perhaps fingers transformed spontaneously and had blossomed into this form after reaching the city, but my understanding was it was a reaction from being reborn too many times. As an aside, mangrubs kind of remind me of the let us partake locusts we see in the Ring City, and both of these bug homies remind me of Kafka's Metamorphosis. We know Miyazaki likes Western literature. I'm curious if anyone more knowledgeable on Kafka's writings would see if there are any connections. I know nothing about any of that, so I'll throw that out to all of you out there. Scholar of the Worst Game notes that we also find a living mangrub in the rafters of the archives. It's fairly evident to me at least that they are capable of traveling, sent out to do some business or other. He could have arrived with Aldrich's return, either following along with him or trailing behind to keep tabs on him. Either way, the associations between Aldrich, Sullivan, Cathedral, Irithyll are such that it's one of the least unusual places we might find a mangrub outside of the actual cathedral. Delight of the Endless adds that I always thought the placement of the two mangrubs outside the cathedral was meant to suggest something important, simply due to the fact that there is only one in each area and the dead one has a miracle. My best wild guess was that they were sent out to retrieve miracles. The dead one had Great Heal, which they may have been trying to get in order to heal Rosaria, but he was killed before he could return. The other one is right under the Divine Pillars miracle and at the top of a ladder, so perhaps he was on his way to get it but couldn't figure out how to get in the cage. So yeah, some very interesting thoughts, and that's just a small fraction of the comments that we're dealing with the mangrubs and the placement of that one mangrub corpse in the Irithyll wetlands. So that's something that we'll definitely have to return to because we've yet to also do Yellowfinger Hazel's questline, which ends with her as a mangrub right by the bonfire in Rosaria's bedchamber. So maybe it's not that they transform and then they don't move far from Rosaria, but maybe that says something about the specific man grub, or I guess in this case woman grub, that in the case of Yellowfinger Hazel, she didn't want to leave Rosaria's side, but you know, if we're to accept that they can travel, that, you know, the fact that we find mangrubs in Irithyll and in the Grand Archives, yeah, something interesting that we should definitely explore going forward. Hardroad 87 writes, the statues of the kids are the young Irithyllians who become Silver Knights and serve the gods. I noticed that they are all packed together in the Church of Yorshka, like they've been put out of the way and forgotten because what was a Way of White city has now been taken over by Sullivan. The bishop statues seem to be holding the golden ritual spear and were probably the Way of White clergy in place before the Sullivan coup. The ritual spear indicating they were serving Gwyndolin before his fall. It seems to me that Gwyndolin was ruling Irithyll for a period. Candidate writes, I think the implication is that Irithyll is always under an illusion. You can see the edge on the walk to Irithyll dungeon, and it explains the line in the doll's description about the moon always shining in Irithyll. I don't know what Creighton's motivations are, but the reason he seems to be in Cirrus's questline is because the Sunless Realms, which are not Irithyll, are somehow connected to Mirrah. The Mirror Shield in Dark Souls 2 is now the Shield of the Sunless Knights in Dark Souls 3, and it's used by Hodrick and Gale. Harrison Gray writes, one reason for the gaping mouths in the chests of both the sewer centipedes and Sullivan's beasts may be influenced from the all-consuming hunger of Aldrich and the desire for human dregs. The Devourer of Gods, or Sullivan, may have twisted some of his followers into all-consuming creatures that trawl about, seeking unlikely victims to harvest for their human dregs. Each time we encounter the creatures, they are near bodies of water. If the creatures kill someone in the wetlands, or on the bridge over the wetlands, they may use the connecting Irithyll sewers to flush human dregs down into the area with the Aldrich Faithful Covenant and Archdeacon MacDonald. Water naturally flows to the lowest point, and if I recall correctly, the cistern with Archdeacon MacDonald is at the bottom of Irithyll. On that last point, I should add that it's not just that water flows to the lowest point, but we know about the human dregs, that the human dregs sink to the lowest levels imaginable. So thank you, Harrison. Yeah, that is a really apt comment, and one that, again, we'll be exploring in greater depth when we reach Anor Londo proper. A Darker Glow writes, on the Outrider Knights, it could be that the 4 ghost knights we see leaving Irithyll are simply those sent to Lothric Castle after the Bell of Awakening has chimed, a last attempt to wrest control over Lothric before the Unkindled could. The one beneath the tower in the Undead settlement could have been a long-standing sentry to protect Irithyll and the Cathedral of the Deep, thus having left the Boreal Valley too long ago for the player to see his spectre. Yeah, good point, well said, and a much better way of articulating the point that I was trying to make in the previous episode, but that I evidently failed to. On Londor and the Lord of Hollows, I believe that Londor is a place built upon the ruins of New Londo. The fact that Yuria says, "Koth, I have failed thee," upon death, sells the dark hand employed by the Dark Race and encourages the player to inherit dark sigils and become a Lord of Hollows, a title not unlike Dark Lord. Seem to all be clues to that end. I believe that Koth, having failed to truly end the cycle of firelinking, even if the chosen undead walks away, others could and eventually would rekindle the first flame, devise a new plan to bring about his Age of Dark, this time by having the chosen undead fully usurp the fire, to take it away so no one would be able to rekindle it again. He changed the name of the city, Londo, to Londor, eschewing the new, and helped to cleanse it of ghosts. Or perhaps these ghosts vanished sometime after the death of the 4 kings and found 3 sisters who could spread his word into prophecy and founded the Sable Church. So again, very interesting thoughts, and I thank you for sharing them. Christian writes, in regards to your comment about how Greirat would have entered Irithyll, I think the answer is in the way we find his corpse if Siegvard or Patches don't rescue him. He's found in the sewers near the river under the bridge. Now we know that this river area isn't blocked by any kind of magnetosphere force field because Sullivan's beast can follow us down and attack. Thus it seems that if we assume Greirat has the ability to jump and climb, which sadly our own player character seems largely incapable of, it's not a stretch to assume he was able to scale down the cliff or the side of the bridge and enter from the sewers, which also don't appear to have the same force field, as we don't see the same ripple effect when entering as we do on the bridge. Anyways, not too important, but there you go. Well, thank you, Christian, because yeah, no, that's something that, you know, we spent a fair bit of time in the previous episode speculating about. And maybe I spent a fair bit of time speculating about something that wasn't too important, but either way, I appreciate you providing this suggestion, which seems most likely to me, especially in light of the fact that we know that the thralls can and do climb and scale walls. And so it is absolutely not a stretch to suggest that Greirat came up against the force field and then just decided to, you know, lower himself down into the wetlands where, had you not set things up accordingly, he would meet his end at the hands of the sewer centipedes. So yeah. Yosaho writes, on Doris, the Japanese description of Doris's gnawing is like a complete different context, and I kinda understand why they did that. Blue popo, basically. It is said about a fat and drunk woman slipped and fell into the deep, so from that context I think what drove Doris mad isn't the deep, but rather the scene of her comrade being devoured alive by those insects. If we look how she behaves in the game, she sits there with her hat on her chest, crying all the time as if she is moaning to someone. On escaping Eldritch's clutches, the Japanese description on the last part reads, Horus is one of Eldritch's children, also the one of the two that survived. So 2 interesting things here. First, Eldritch devoured his own children, maybe they're adopted like churches tend to do. Second, what if they did not escape by their own means, but something happened to Eldritch before he could devour them, like he became Lord of Cinder? So if they want to go after Eldritch for revenge, where would they go, if not the first flame? And then they are burned to ash, becoming unkindled. On the vomiting of the Irithyll slaves, I think what they are vomiting is mercury. It doesn't have the exact same effect as pestilent mercury, but if moonbugs contain a high density of mercury, it would be an explanation why the Blade of the Pontiff Knight being eaten away, because mercury can dissolve alloy. Smo as a knight, Smo never became one of the 4 knights. The fact that he could join the highest rank of Gwyn's army, if not because of his habit, I don't think it is a stretch to say that Smo is a knight. Yorm being corrupted by the profane flame. The most well-accepted reason why Yorm doesn't link the fire seems to be that he's depressed, which I find pretty weak. For him to fight Sigvard without hesitation. If we remove the fog gate, Yorm will be staring directly at the profane flame. The depression of destroying his own kingdom and weakened by linking the fire, making him both physically and mentally vulnerable to the corruption of the profane flame. And another game with a wonderful soundscape is apparently Monster Hunter. So yeah, again, thank you all very, very, very much for everything. And I apologize sincerely for those of you whose comments I wasn't able to read, but there are just too many, and they're all really, really good, and I'd love to feature them all, but we just don't have the time. But thank you all very, very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.